Hey, tonight we slipped quietly into a room lit by gaslight, where the mirror is fogged, the air smells faintly of lavender and starch, and your mate is already tugging at the back of your gown with a practiced firmness. You feel the fabric pinch. Your sides and a pressure begin to tighten around your ribs tighter, just one more pull. You're not a noblewoman or a duchess, you're you. But in this strange dream of a century past, you wake inside a world where the first thing expected of you each day is to shrink. The corset doesn't wait. The corset never waits. You look down and see the long, winding laces trailing behind you like the tail of some obedient serpent. The garment is stiff in your hands, heavy with bone and intent. You can feel its shape even before it wraps around. You narrow at the waist, curved and controlling at the bust, unforgiving across the hips. It doesn't bend to you. You bend to it. And here's your nightly reality check. If you actually had to live like this, with your lungs compressed, your stomach displaced, your liver casually nudged to the side, sorry, you probably wouldn't survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's drifting off where now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the bedroom floor, still drowsy, but you can feel her coming. Before she knocks your lady's maid, she carries the corset like it's a holy object. And in this house, in this society, maybe it is. She doesn't speak much. She just gestures, holds it open, and waits for you to step into the prison willingly. Which, to be fair, most women do. As she tightens the laces, you hear your bones creak a little under the strain. Not breaking, no but obeying. Already your back is straighter than it wants to be. Your lower ribs press inward, slow and reluctant, like a drawbridge rising under orders. Breathe, she says, and you try, but air doesn't come in. Way it used to, feels narrower now, stiffer, and this is just the start. Every day in the Victorian era, thousands of women awoke to this exact ritual. It wasn't optional, was as essential as brushing your teeth or buttoning your shoes. A proper woman was a cinched woman, not just tight, but measured. Corsets came with inch tape sewn into their seams, so you could track your waist, like a dress diary. 24 inches? Acceptable. 22. Desirable. 18. Angelic. 16. Dangerous, darling. Now you're practically divine. Historians still argue whether women were truly forced into these extremes or willingly embraced them, but letters and diaries from the era tell us one thing. Girls were taught from an early age that discipline began at the waist. Tighten your belt wasn't a metaphor, it was an aspiration by age 10 or 11. Many young girls were already in their training corsets. These weren't meant to be flattering, just formative. They reshaped a growing rib cage like a bonsai tree, delicate, twisted, and perfectly constrained. Once adolescence struck, the lacing got more aggressive. A respectable lady couldn't just be beautiful, she had to work at it, hour by painful hour. The corset wasn't just underwear. It was expectation, obedience, and class consciousness stitched into a single, breath-stealing item. But let's pull back the lens for a second. The corset didn't originate in the Victorian age. Versions of it existed as far back as the 16th century stiffened bodices that flattened the chest or lifted it. Depending on the era's tastes, what made the Victorian corset unique was its deadly ambition. It didn't just shape you, it re-engineered. You weren't merely following fashion. You were being reforged into a cultural ideal so narrow you couldn't run, couldn't bend, couldn't even sit comfortably without perching like a nervous bird. Women fainted in churches, trains, streets, and drawing rooms, and society simply applauded. Of course, corsets weren't always torture devices. Some women insisted they felt supported, upright, powerful, but their support and then their spinal realignment through sheer fabric tyranny. Here's a quirky bit. In 1859, a French satirist published a fictional corset calendar, where the names of the months were replaced by reductions. In inches, March became 18 inches, May was 17, and by July, the wearer reached a barely breathable 16 and a half. It was a joke, but, like most satire, it struck close to the bone. Literally, and here's where. Things get darker. You step outside and instantly feel the judgment. Other women look you up and down, assessing your waist with silent precision. Are you cinched tight enough? Are your ribs clearly protesting under that bodice? Are you sacrificing as much as they are? Because beauty wasn't just about attraction. It was a kind of social arms race. Tighter corsets meant more discipline, more elegance, more virtue. Loose lacing meant laziness, slouching, moral decay, and men, well, they noticed. A woman with a finely tapered waist, one 19th century gentleman once wrote, possesses the very emblem of refinement. The tighter you were, the more marriageable you appeared. No pressure, right? By now, your breathing is shallow, your back aches, and the walk to breakfast feels like a marathon in heels you're not wearing. You sit delicately, balancing on the edge of a chair. Bending at the waist isn't really an option anymore, but you smile. You always smile. Because corseting wasn't just fashion, it was theater. The daily act of looking composed while quietly enduring a strangled torso was the Victorian woman's cruelest magic trick. And you're center stage now. You wake again not because the sun's up, your maid sees to that, but because you can't quite take a full breath. The stays pressing around you like a second rib cage, one that didn't get the memo about expansion. It's not a dream anymore. It's morning, and the corset is already part of your body. There's no time to linger in bed. Victorian mornings aren't lazy, they're scripted. And your role begins with a gasp and a tug. You rise, groggy, the cool wood floor underfoot, and allow your maid to begin again. Yesterday's laces have loosened overnight. That simply won't do. A lady's waist should never greet the day without first being reminded who's in charge. She pulls the corset tighter, humming a hymn under her breath, something about grace and obedience. You grip the bedpost as she braces a knee against your back and yanks. The boning bites in, air thins. You exhale instinctively, and she uses the moment to cinch 2 more inches. There, she says brightly. Now you look correct. Correct, not beautiful. Not comfortable. Correct. This was the rhythm of corset life, the morning cinch. It marked the official start of the day, whether you were a housemaid or an heiress. Corsets weren't only for grand balls and dinner parties. They were a sunrise obligation. It's a declaration that your body wasn't yours until it had been shaped to the day's expectations. Historians still argue whether corset-related health issues were as widespread as claimed, but Victorian medical texts describe a wave of women reporting morning sickness. That had nothing to do with pregnancy, lightheadedness, cold sweats, nausea. These were all normal reactions. To being squeezed before breakfast, you make your way to the dressing. Mirror, today, the corset matches your chemise, a pale, blushing cream with scalloped trim and stiff steel busk. It holds your torso like a prison built by an architect with a grudge. But in the mirror, you're stunning. Your waist curves inward like the stem of a goblet. You look like a portrait. It's an ideal. You just can't bend over to put on your shoes in. In fact, you'll need someone to help with that too. Corsets weren't merely inconvenient. They turned everyday activities into tasks requiring strategy. Want to pick up a dropped glove? You'd best perform a gentle squat and pray your knees cooperate. Need to climb stairs? Hope no one's watching because your hips can't move. Freely. Want to sneeze? Do it quietly, your ribs can't take a sudden jolt. And breakfast? Oh, you'll attend, but you'll nibble. Corsets compressed not just lungs, but stomachs. Hunger came in confused waves, sharp pangs muted by pressure, then sudden fullness after 2 spoonfuls of porridge. You learn not to trust your appetite. Anymore, here's a strange truth. Corsets weren't designed to be worn alone. They worked in concert with layers, chemise, corset, bustle pad, petticoats, drawers, stockings, sometimes even a cage crinoline. Each added its own demands. And yet, it all began with the corset. Get the waist right, and the rest would fall into place. The true cruelty of the morning cinch wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Each day began with an intimate reminder that your natural shape was unacceptable, that your waist without artifice, was not ready to be seen. That comfort was indulgent, that beauty hurt, and that the pain, well, that meant you were doing it right. And yet some mornings, you tighten it yourself because the mirror approves, because your friends will notice. So there's a quiet, strange power in being admired for your suffering. Let's drop. And on a typical upper-middle-class Victorian household, 1880s London, a young woman named Eleanor sits at her vanity. Her maid has just laced her to 19 inches, a half-inch reduction from yesterday. Eleanor's corset is new, stiff with starch and still breaking in. She winces as she twists to reach a hairbrush. Her mother enters, eyes her approvingly, and says, "Very elegant, dear. That waist will catch a solicitor by Christmas." That's not a joke. That's a plan. But corsetry wasn't just an upper-class vanity. Working-class women wore them too, some because they wanted to, many because they had to. Maids, shopgirls, governesses, factory workers, all were expected to maintain a respectable figure. Employers wouldn't hire a woman with a loose appearance. Corsets kept you presentable, even if your job had you on your feet 10 hours a day. A quirky little anecdote from 1873 tells of a Lancashire textile girl who wore her corset so tight to a mill shift that she fainted mid-threading and toppled into the spinning machine. Luckily, she survived with 3 cracked ribs and an odd sort of fame. Local papers called her the fainting hourglass. This was normal. In fact, many women planned for morning fainting spells. It became part of the routine. Lace to 2. Tightly before tea, just faint gracefully, be revived with salts, and move on. The social script accounted for your suffering and rewarded your poise in handling it. You're not just wearing fashion, you're performing it. From the first pull of the day's laces to the final loosening at night, your body isn't yours, it's curated, sculpted, reduced, and still somehow admired. At mid-morning, you walk into town. Every movement is deliberate. You can't run. You wouldn't dare, but you float. Shoulders back, chin lifted, spine braced into statuesque posture. Every man glances. Every woman assesses. You are, by all definitions of your world, correct. And yet, the hunger builds. The dull ache in your back creeps toward your ribs. You need to breathe, really breathe. You long for the sound of popping eyelets, for the glide of the laces coming loose, but not yet. It's only the beginning of the day. You don't remember exactly when it started, but sometime between your 12th birthday and your first dance card, waist measuring became a sport. Not openly, of course. That would be vulgar. It was everywhere. Quiet as lace and twice as sharp. At church picnics, you'd hear the whispers. She's gone down to 19. Or, her mother says she's aiming for 17 by Christmas. At the seamstress's shop, girls would pretend to measure fabric while slyly side-eyeing, who winced first when laced. A faint gasp, a flutter of the fingers. Ought to loose. Not serious. Not winning. Because make no mistake, you were in a competition now. And the prize was social survival. You tug at your gloves as your maid announces that Miss Harper will call for you shortly. Miss Harper, your friend, your rival, your daily benchmark. She boasts an 18-inch waist and a terrifying tolerance for tight lacing. She claims she can hold her breath for an entire psalm. You once caught her swaying during the Lord's Prayer, but she didn't fall. She smiled through the tremor, like a soldier in heels. Your own waist, 19 1/4. You checked. This morning, twice. That 1/4 inch eats at you, and so the morning cinch becomes something more. It's a personal duel. With your corset, with your past self, with Miss Harper. It's proof that you are winning at femininity, no matter what your lungs say. Historians still debate whether most Victorian women actually tight-laced to dangerous extremes, or if the imagery was exaggerated by magazines and fetishists. But the evidence in women's private diaries suggests it was both, a lived reality and a fantasy. A fact and a fiction women tried to live up to. Magazines fanned the flames. In an 1881 issue of the Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine, a reader boasted of lacing her daughter to 16.5 inches by age 15. She included helpful sketches and tips. The editor responded with enthusiastic approval and a challenge to readers to write in with their daughter's progress, and thus, the corset arms race escalated. in parlors across London and Boston and Paris. Girls leaned against bedposts while their mothers pulled and pulled and pulled. It wasn't abuse. It was fashion. It was duty. It was love in its most socially sanctioned, suffocating form. This morning, you attempt something bold. You ask your maid to go tighter, just half an inch. She hesitates. "Miss, you haven't had breakfast. I'll eat later," you murmur. Eyes fixed on your reflection, she tightens. You feel the corset clamped closer, the edges of your ribs protesting under the press. Your breath shortens, becomes top-heavy, shallow. You walk to the mirror like you're made of glass, and there it is, that shadow of a waist, curved like a swan's neck, tapering from bodice to bustle, the silhouette you've chased for months, the shape that men write sonnets about, the hourglass. That means you're winning. You look exquisite. You also feel faint. But this is the balance Victorian femininity demands: suffering and silence. Beauty under siege, dignity in discomfort. Even corset advertisements played into the competition. They promised reductions of up to 4 inches within a fortnight. It included testimonials from mothers and debutantes who swore by their new figure-shaping regimes. My daughter Clara now fits into her 17-inch stays without complaint. Read one glowing review. She is the envy of the entire county. It was never just about clothes. It was always about being envied. And envy, you soon learn, is a cold thing. Miss Harper arrives for your stroll, perfectly powdered, her waist almost inhuman. As you walk through the gardens, you exchange pleasantries with strangers, then sideways glances with each other. The path is narrow, the wind is stiff. Her gloves are brighter, but your parasol is newer. She moves like porcelain. You pretend not to sweat. You both know the game. Neither of you names it until you hear it softly from a passing group of boys in top hats and smirks. That one in the blue. Look at that waist. You don't even know which one they meant. But it's enough. You'll go tighter tomorrow. Here's a peculiar tidbit. Some girls would secretly pad their undergarments above the waist to make their corseted figures appear even more extreme. Bust enhancers, hip rolls, and padded petticoats weren't just about fullness. They were visual tricks to make the waist look impossibly small. An illusion of anatomy, engineered by society, so even when you weren't shrinking, you were pretending to shrink. Anything to win? The worst part? You forget what your natural shape looks like? You haven't seen it in years? Not really. Naked in the bath, your waist still seems singed. Your ribs still flare inward. You catch yourself holding your breath. Even when alone. The corset doesn't leave you when the laces come off. It lives in your muscles now, and in your mind. You return home, breath tight and ankles sore. You eat half a slice of buttered toast, then feel so full you have to lie down. On your side, of course, laying flat presses your organs into rebellion. But still, you smile. Because tomorrow, that extra quarter inch is going, you'll see to it. You run your hand along the smooth edge of the corset laid out on your bed. At first glance, it's beautiful ivory satin with tiny glass buttons and floral embroidery that someone stitched with real affection. But then your fingers trace beneath the surface, and you feel what's hidden inside: hard, curved, and unyielding. Bone. Real bone. Not yours, though the corset will soon press against them with brutal precision, but whalebone. Or more accurately, baleen. It once lived in the jaw of a creature longer than your entire street. Now it's been boiled, scraped, carved, and sewn into stays. Bent to shape your spine instead of sieving plankton in the North Sea? Yes, it's that dramatic. Whalebone was the material of choice for much of the 19th century, prized for its flexibility and strength. It could hold a curve without cracking, which made it perfect for creating that hourglass silhouette. Corset makers adored it. Your ribs, less so, and later. It wasn't just baleen. As the century pushed on, corsets evolved into terrifying hybrids. Of cloth and flat steel, sharpened not to cut skin but to dominate posture. Each strip was carefully inserted to maintain vertical rigidity. You weren't just being supported, you were being corrected. Forced upright like a sapling lashed to a post. Historians still argue whether these materials were chosen purely for their functionality or whether there was an unspoken delight in their severity. After all, Soft fabrics could shape a body, not with such finality. And it's not just the frame. Fabric itself is densely woven couture, a stiff cotton, twill that resists stretching. Inside, the seams are reinforced with horsehair or hemp cord. Everything about the corset's construction is meant to resist you. Your breath, your bulk, your will. You're not dressing yourself. You're engineering a structure around your torso. Let's step into the workshop for a moment. You're in a London corsetier parlor in the 1870s. The air is thick with the scent of chalk, sizing, and steam. Women bustle in and out of curtained booths, stripped to their shifts while the fitter takes measurements. Not just waist, but underbust, overbust, hips, and torso length. It's intimate, almost medical. And when she disappears behind a velvet curtain and returns with a corset stitched just for you, it feels personal, like a secret. But make no mistake, you won't control it. It will control you. The fitter turns you to the mirror. See how the busk lies flush against your sternum, she says. That's the sign of a proper fit.
Oh.
She points out the curve of your back, the angle of your hips, the way your bust is lifted, not just enhanced but displayed. You're perfectly symmetrical, she murmurs. Feel pride rise. Followed by the sudden awareness, you can no longer fully exhale. You nod anyway. There's a quirk to this world. Corset advertisements rarely mentioned comfort. They spoke of figure refinement, matrimonial success, improved carriage, but rarely whether the wearer could walk for more than 30 minutes without swooning. One brand bragged that its corsets had reinforced underbust fluting that would prevent wayward expansion. It's prevent expansion, as in no breathing room, not metaphorically, literally. Let's talk bone-deep damage. Medical records from the late 19th century include a morbid parade of corset-induced maladies, bruised ribs, muscular atrophy, liver compression. Some doctors even claim to have discovered corset liver, a condition where the organ had grown unnaturally concave from years of sustained pressure. Of course, some modern historians argue that these claims were exaggerated or influenced by anti-fashion bias. And yet, countless physicians at the time wrote with real alarm about internal injuries sustained by women in fashionable society. You examine your own reflection again. The corset you're wearing today includes a split steel busk at the front, a long hooked plate that snaps closed to trap you in. Once fastened, the laces at the back do the rest. You're braced, lifted, locked, and if something pinches or presses oddly, you won't notice until the bruises form. One young woman, writing anonymously to a magazine in 1892, described how she learned to ignore the pain. The ache became a kind of numb hum under my ribs. I did not call it pain. I called it womanhood. That sink in. Pain was rebranded as elegance, restriction as refinement, and the rigid materials behind it all, bone, steel, rope, became symbols of grace. Back in your room, you attempt to sit, not flop, not fold. You perch, straight-backed and high-waisted, like a statue in a museum. The corset won't allow slouching. That would bend the steel. That would disrespect the baleen. Even when you rest, the corset keeps working. It's shaping. Your silhouette, yes, but also your behavior. You move carefully, speak with more restraint. Your voice lifts slightly. Deep breathing is impossible, so your vocal range narrows. You laugh less, or at least more delicately. You are graceful, poised, polished. You are also in mild distress at all times, and yet you feel beautiful. This is the paradox corsets created, a device of physical control that still made you feel powerful in its own twisted way. When you wear one, you know you are watched, admired, elevated figuratively and literally. Feel the corset's strength under your fingertips and believe it's your own, but it's not. It's whale, steel, wire, cord, and none of it bends for you. You glide down the staircase, your palm grazing the banister, trying to act as if the corset hasn't already claimed your ribs like a jealous lover. Each step jars slightly upward into your diaphragm, and you can't quite take a full breath. You smile anyway. Today's event is a garden party genteel affair. full of sugar cubes, gloved greetings, and polite weather complaints. But you know what it really is? A parade, competition, a theater of silhouettes. And yours must be flawless. You step outside and are met with sun, trimmed hedges, and at least 24 other women standing tall and rigid, corseted like lilies in iron vases. You've heard the phrase, "She took my breath away." Sweet sentiment, sure. They took your own breath first. Because the deeper truth of corsetry, what you're really feeling now, right this second, is not just tightness, it's compression. Your lungs cannot expand, not fully, not like they want to. Deep breath becomes a careful calculation, inhaled just enough to speak, not enough to wheeze. Historians still argue whether fainting was truly epidemic among Victorian women, or if it's a melodramatic myth made worse by gaslight and gossip. But when you feel your vision narrow at the edges after only a short walk across the lawn, you understand how real it could have been, especially at formal events, where appearances meant everything and loosening your corset even a notch was seen as lazy, slovenly, or worse, rebellious. You find your place among the guests and hold your parasol steady. Conversation sparkles like teacups clinking. Mrs. Densley is recounting her daughter's new courtship. Miss Finch is pretending not to listen, and Lady Hawthorne is already on her second sherry. Everyone is terribly upright, and then it happens. A sharp intake of breath. A wobble. Miss Clara, 20 years old. Eyes wide and cheeks flushed, sways dramatically and crumples, like a swan made of linen. She faints. Gasps flutter from the women. Someone fetches smelling salts. 2 footmen carry her delicately to the shade. No one panics. Fainting is ... expected. It's practically etiquette. A joke even floats by. Too tightly laced for secrets, that one. Polite laughter all around. You don't laugh? You're too busy counting your own breath, discreetly loosening your grip on your reticule to let the blood flow back into your fingertips. You'll last through the party. You always do. But only just. Victorian doctors warned about corset. Lungs, a condition in which the lower lobes of the lungs collapsed from years of compression. Autopsies revealed folded, shrunken lungs in women who had tight-laced for decades. The ribs resemble those of birds, one physician wrote grimly. Thin, curved inward, and fragile. Imagine that, your lungs reshaped to fit a dress. But let's return to the garden, where you're offered a seat. You hesitate not because you're rude, but because sitting with a corset is its own choreography. You don't sink into a chair. You descend onto it, slowly, carefully. You perch at the edge with your spine like a pillar. Slouching isn't possible, slipping down. Never. Even laughter is edited. A giggle? Sure. A loud belly laugh? Physically risky. Here's a quirky note. Corset-induced breathlessness didn't just affect physical health, it shaped the very soundscape of Victorian womanhood. Speech became higher, tighter, breathier. Corset voice, some called it. Flirtatious, delicate, often mistaken for refinement. But it was really just a trick of restricted airflow. Some Victorian vocal instructors even advised women to practice singing with their corsets on, arguing it would train proper projection through minimal breath. That's one way to describe wheezing in B-flat. But why endure all this? Because breathlessness became a beauty. Think of the poetry, frail, willowy, ethereal. Men praised women who looked like they might vanish in a breeze. Women were taught to speak softly, laugh quietly, walk withaut hastenal, because it was elegant. But because they physically couldn't do otherwise, and the fewer your breaths, the more praise you received for your poise. You pause to sip. Tea, not drinks hip. The corset presses your stomach into your diaphragm, and even half a cup risks bloating. No seconds for cake. Not unless you want to cough behind a hedge and pray no one hears. Yet the compliments come. My, how you've trimmed your figure. Do share your corsetier's name? Mine lacks conviction. You nod demurely, murmuring something about discipline and good tailoring. Inside, you want to scream more at least, gasp dramatically. But there's no room for that. At the far end of the lawn, a young girl is twirling, maybe 10 or 11. No corset, yet just ribbons and innocence. Her waist is natural, her breath full and easy. You watch her dance in the grass and think about the day her laces will tighten for the first time. Will she remember what it felt like to breathe? Probably not. Few of us do. Once the corset becomes a habit, you manage the rest of the party with grace, make your goodbyes, and step into the carriage. Alone now, you undo one laced, just one end, feel a shudder of air return to your lungs. It's not much, but it's enough to remind you that you're still in there, beneath the stitching, barely. You sit stiffly in a parlor chair, upholstered in brocade, and barely softer than a church pew. Across from you, a doctor clears his throat. His spectacles rest low on his nose, and he gestures vaguely at the diagram spread across the tea table pail. Torsos flayed open like botanical studies, showing what corsets do to the human form. You're the example today. Your corset is the subject of inquiry, and your body, well, it's become a medical case study in slow, fashionable harm. The physician, one of those mid-century generalists with too much pride and too little bedside manner, taps the illustration with a gloved finger. Observe here, he says, how the ribs are gradually trained inward. The floating ribs, those last two pairs, are especially compliant. They bend without breaking. Convenient, isn't it? You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. You're breathing from the top of your lungs again, shallow and quiet, lest you disrupt the corset's cruel embrace. Now the stomach, he continues, displaced downward. The liver compressed, its edges visibly creased on dissection. Case in Edinburgh, this was in 72, a young woman of 24 had worn her stays day and night. When she died typhoid, unrelated, we discovered her liver shaped like a ladle. A ladle, he chuckles, as if this is dinner conversation. You should have seen it. Absolutely concave. Historians still debate whether these medical anecdotes were widespread or dramatized by reformers with anti-fashion agendas. But these autopsy records were real enough to stir public concern. Journals published ghastly sketches. Lectures were delivered in gaslit lecture halls. It's often two rooms divided between curiosity and scorn, of course. The women they described were never in the room. You sit listening and try not to think about your own organs quietly displaced beneath satin and steel. The doctor shifts tone, growing philosophical. It's fascinating, he muses. The corset operates like a moral instrument. It encourages posture, controls appetite, suppresses unseemly movements. One could argue it civilizes the female form. Ah, there it is. You've heard this sermon before, not always from doctors. Sometimes from clergymen, other times from aunties, with sharp eyes and sharper tongues. A woman's body, they say, must not be allowed to relax. That leads to sin. A loose waist leads to loose virtue. And what better way to instill discipline than to quite literally make it difficult to indulge? Here's a curious historical footnote. Some early 19th century medical manuals recommended corsets as remedies for hysteria, melancholy, and even chronic daydreaming. The logic? A rigid body produced a rigid mind? Young women prone to flights of fancy could be anchored by bone and busk. Of course, that idea backfired spectacularly, because corsets also created symptoms: tightness in the chest, racing, heartbeats, anxiety, dizziness, all of which were misdiagnosed as hysteria. Doctors treated women for the very symptoms caused by the treatment itself. A closed loop of diagnosis and dysfunction. You shift in your chair, trying to stretch your spine. But the corset doesn't budge. Another doctor enters the room. This one younger, less judgmental. He speaks gently. There is a trend now to move toward healthier silhouettes, he says. Looser lacing, straight front corsets, and more S-bend compression. You nod again, politely, though you know the truth. Fashion doesn't let go easily, especially when pain is so good at hiding behind posture. Let's examine a case that made headlines in 1865. Miss L, a young woman from Brighton, collapsed at a dance. She died 3 days later from what was deemed congestive complications, but the autopsy told another story. Her ribs had splintered not all at once, but slowly, over time, creating tiny internal tears that had gone unnoticed. Her corset, displayed at the inquest, had been custom laced to 16 inches. It had done its job perfectly, and yet she died anyway. Still, corset manufacturers didn't back down. They added more boning, reinforced the stitching, and adjusted for the modern, moving woman, as if better engineering would solve what was essentially a battle between anatomy and aesthetics. You stand now, politely excused. The doctors go on debating, is it medicine or mutilation? One asks, but you already know the answer. Outside, the air is clearer, but you still can't take that full, glorious breath. The corset won't let you. You've forgotten what that kind of air feels like. Even now, you imagine your liver curling inward, your lungs fluttering like folded fans. You wonder if a century from now, some future scholar will look at these medical records and ask, why didn't they stop? And you already know the answer, because they couldn't. Because beauty doesn't whisper, it demands. The corsets, stitched from expectation and reinforced with cultural approval, were never just garments. They were rules you wore on the inside. You try not to stare too long at your own reflection in the cheval mirror. It's dressed better than you are. There's something ghostly about the figure gazing back, stiff, polished, perfectly curved, but with a stillness that's not quite human. Behind you, the maid tightens the laces. Almost there, miss, she says, her fingers working fast, practiced, invisible. Only another inch. You grit your teeth and exhale. What little air remains in your lungs. Another inch. That's all anyone ever wants. Another inch off the waist. Another degree of elegance. Another proof that you've tried harder than the woman beside you, that you've outdisciplined the competition. You don't say any of this aloud. You just nod. The mirror doesn't blink. Now you're ready. For society. Or at least, for the charade. Your shoulders are back. Your spine is upright. Your bust is high. Your stomach hollowed. You are, by all accounts, the image of Victorian poise. But underneath that elegance is an iron mask, not on your face, on your rib cage. Corsets weren't optional at your level. In certain households, to appear at breakfast without one was a scandal. And in public? Unthinkable. Historians still argue whether most middle and upper class women actually laced as tightly as the illustrations suggest. Many corsets were worn loose enough for comfort. Practicality had to win sometimes. But society adored extremes. And for every reasonable woman in a gently laced corset, there were dozens more chasing the 18-inch waist like it was salvation or ammunition in a marital war. And that brings you to marriage. Because corsets weren't just about vanity, they were currency. A well-laced waist could win a husband faster than a dowry. Mothers knew it. So did men. An eligible bachelor Cadand often did request a woman's waist measurement as casually as he might ask her age. One 1870s etiquette guide suggested that a woman should strive to maintain her youthful waist throughout courtship and well into her married life, lest her husband become disillusioned. Translation: keep it tight. Even after childbirth, a French satire from the 1840s depicted a groom receiving a wedding night surprise. His bride, laced, expanded dramatically. She inflated like a pastry in the oven, he writes in horror. The punchline was cruel, but the fear, real. You feel your corset biting beneath your arms as you descend the stairs. Let's not pretend you can sit at dinner. Not properly. You perch at the edge of your chair, knees together, elbows poised. You barely eat, not just because you're nervous, but because your stomach has nowhere to go. A single bite of roast fowl feels like a sin. Corset holds your insides like a scold. One study conducted in 1890, now infamous, claimed that women in tight-laced corsets reduced their food intake by nearly half. Doctors coined a new phrase for it: corset anorexia. Girls were quite literally starving themselves in silk. And then there were the fainting couches. You've seen one in your aunt's drawing room. A velvet chaise long with a single curved arm. It wasn't purely decorative, it was a necessity. With lungs squeezed and blood flow altered, it was common to black out after standing too quickly, laughing too hard. You're just existing for too long in an 18-inch prison. Yet, rather than blame the garment, society turned the symptom into charm. Fainting woman was delicate, feminine, in need of rescuing. There's a perversity in how Victorian society romanticized the consequences of compression. Breathlessness became flirtation. Fragility became virtue. Collapsing at a ball. Proof you were a lady. This obsession wasn't new, of course. Remember the ancient Chinese practice of foot binding? The smaller the foot, the more marriageable? The girl, despite the lifelong disability, the corset was merely a Western version of the same idea. Control the body to control the woman. And in many ways. Remember? Poor Eleanor Talbot, your cousin? She had her wedding gown taken in 3 times before the ceremony. The tighter the laces, the stronger the vows, her mother joked. Eleanor fainted in the vestibule and missed half the ceremony. It's not funny, but they laughed anyway. Reach the ballroom and blend in. Dozens of women, all carved into hourglasses. You exchange compliments like currency. You're looking so slender. What an exquisite silhouette. Each one a coated pat on the back for suffering in. Silence. Here's a quirky aside. Corsets became so standardized that furniture adjusted around them. Dining chairs had shorter backs to accommodate women who couldn't lean. Some pianos were designed with sloped benches so you could perch without bending your rigid spine. Fashion didn't follow comfort. Comfort was redesigned to follow fashion. You glance at the clock. It's nearly midnight. Time to go home and peel it all off, but not yet. Your mother shoots you a look from across the room. Posture, smile, breathe. If you can, because tonight you're not a person. You're a silhouette. And silhouettes don't complain. The moment your bedroom door clicks shut behind you, your shoulders sag not because you're tired, but because you finally can. The strain holding your body upright has been mechanical all evening, enforced by the steel and stitching beneath. Your gown? And now? Now it's time for the great unstrapping. Your maid stands behind you, hands poised at the corset laces. She's seen this every night, and yet there's always a moment of hesitation, like she's about to defuse a bomb. Which, frankly, she is. One wrong tug and you might crumple to the floor. It's happened before. She begins loosening the stays, millimeter by millimeter. You suck in through your nose as the first bit of tension releases sharp, heady, and strange. And it's not relief. Not yet. It's a sensation like blood rushing into an old wound. And then, as the final knot slips loose, you inhale fully for the first time all day. The air feels different, cooler, heavier, as though your lungs have doubled in size and are rushing. To reclaim the space, you'll bruise, the maid mutters, motioning to the angry red indentations lining your sides. You nod. You always bruise. You slide the corset off your torso and set it gently on the bed, almost reverently. It's just fabric and bone, whalebone specifically, flexible yet cruel, lightweight but unyielding, like so many social expectations. Here's something historians love to debate. Did women actually want to wear corsets, or were they coerced? It's not a simple answer. Diaries from the time reveal everything from gleeful obsession to bitter resentment. Some women bragged about their measurements in letters. I've reached 17 inches at last, while others tore their corsets to shreds in fits of rebellion. But even rebellion came with consequences. Take Lady Caroline Hervey, for example. She famously abandoned her corset in 1878, citing freedom of breath and conscience. Within months, she was banned from 3 drawing rooms, disinvited from a wedding, and subject to endless whispers. Society didn't care about her lungs. They cared about the message she sent. A woman who won't lace, won't obey. Still, the rumblings of dissent were growing. In the shadows of drawing rooms and the footnotes of fashion magazines, the seeds of resistance began to sprout. Women formed societies. One of the first was the Rational Dress Society, founded in 1881. Their goal is to promote clothing that didn't deform the body. Their slogans were bold. No dress should deform. Down with the corset. Mainstream society, of course, laughed. Magazines called them hysterical. Men called them mannish. And even some women insisted the rational dress movement was just a phase for bored spinsters. But they kept going, quietly, firmly, and some began designing their own alternatives. Meet Dr. Gustav Jaeger. Not a woman, but a surprising ally. He promoted woolen undergarments that encouraged the skin to breathe. He wasn't especially popular with debutantes, but among the more reform-minded, middle-class women, he was a godsend. And then came the corset competitors. You might not have heard of the Liberty Bodhisattva, sleeveless vest introduced in the 1890s, marketed for young girls and working women. It didn't cinch, it didn't dig, it offered warmth and modesty without cruelty. Of course, it was also completely unfashionable, so it never really caught on with society's elite. Still, its existence hinted at something radical: choice. Tonight, lying in bed, you consider what choice really means. You run your fingers over the marks on your ribs. They'll fade by morning, but the ache won't. You wonder what it would be like to go to a ball in a gown that doesn't strangle you, to sit through a dinner and actually taste the food, to laugh, truly laugh, without the fear of bursting a seam or blacking out. But you also know what that would cost: reputation, respectability, maybe even a proposal. It's not just bones being crushed under these corsets' decisions. Futures, whole lives, and yet, strangely, you remember your sister whispering with delight when she was first laced into hers. "It makes me feel like a lady," she'd said, spinning in front of the mirror, and you didn't have the heart to tell her that feeling like a lady often meant hurting like one. That's the problem with systems of beauty that demand pain. They don't just ask for compliance, they make you want it. They transform suffering into sophistication. You close your eyes. Tomorrow, you'll lace up again. You always do. But tonight, for a few short hours, you will breathe, and that, too, is a kind of rebellion. The days pass in a whirl of fittings, promenades, and carefully orchestrated appearances, but underneath it all, your ribs haven't quite stopped aching. Every time you twist to pick up a dropped glove or bend to inspect a sprig of lavender, in the conservatory, there's a reminder, sharp, insistent, that your body is not your own. It belongs to a shape, a silhouette, a style that's been decided for you, and it is around now. As you pause for breath behind a pillar at yet another interminable garden party, that you begin to hear whispers of something, dangerous, not dangerous like rebellion or ridicule, not like being seen in public without your bonnet tied properly. No, this danger is quieter, medical. A friend leans close, her voice hushed beneath her feathered parasol. "They say Miss Langston coughed up blood last week," her doctor blames. "Her corset. Something about displaced organs." You blink. You've heard of fainting, numb fingers, hysteria, but blood, internal damage, still before you can ask. Someone else giggles and changes the subject, but you don't forget. Historians today still argue whether tightlacing alone could truly displace internal organs or puncture lungs. The Victorian medical establishment certainly thought so, or at least many of them did. Doctors and reformers began publishing increasingly dramatic warnings. One, a Dr. William Barry, described a young woman whose stomach had been forced upwards beneath the diaphragm, leading to unbearable gastric distress. He included a sketch to a stomach folded like a concertina between rows of ribs. Another warned that chronic corset use could cause atrophy of the liver and even misalignment of the heart. Were some of these claims exaggerated? Possibly. The era was prone to sensationalism. But even skeptics acknowledged a pattern: digestive issues, irregular breathing, fainting spells. One autopsy from the 1870s described deformed ribs and hardened abdominal tissue consistent with long-term external compression. And then there's the most haunting phrase of all: floating kidney. Imagine your kidney normally nestled safely behind your lower ribs, freely shifting downward, unsupported. It's not science fiction. The condition nephroplesis was identified and linked to corset wearing in multiple Victorian case studies. Women reported pain, nausea, even urinary complications. Doctors called it the movable kidney, and it became the star exhibit in the medical war against tightlacing. Still, many women didn't believe the warnings. Or perhaps they did, but balanced them against the far greater risks of appearing plain. It's undesirable, unmarriageable. There was even a dark kind of trust in the pain. If you weren't hurting, maybe the corset wasn't working. And yet, some women did begin to notice. In 1884, a quiet pamphlet circulated among young debutantes, titled "The Poison Beneath the Silk." No author. No publisher. Just page after page of observations. From women who'd miscarried after prolonged wear, from servants who collapsed after, being forced into too small corsets by demanding mistresses, from tailors who measured bruises like fabric swatches. You think of this now as you slip out of the ballroom early. You don't need to faint again tonight. Last week was dramatic enough. Your mother had insisted it was nerves. Everyone faints at balls. Dear, it's perfectly fashionable. But you remember the darkness curling around your vision, the thunder of your heart. And the moment when your breath simply stopped, you're beginning to suspect that what's fashionable might also be fatal. Later that night, alone with your maid and the usual post-corset welts, you whisper the question aloud. Do you think this is hurting me? She looks up, startled. Miss. The corset. She's quiet. Then she lifts your chemise and gently presses her fingers into your side. Your liver's sitting too high, she murmurs. Can feel it. She doesn't mean to scare you. It's just a fact. A soft-spoken diagnosis from someone who's seen too much. You remember what she told you once? Her mother died at 32, internal bleeding. She'd worn corsets every day since she was 12. A different kind of legacy. Here's a fringe fact most textbooks skip. Corset-induced deaths weren't just medical, they were sometimes criminal. In 1899, French court heard the case of a girl whose governess had laced her so tightly that she suffered a fatal rupture. The court convicted the governess of negligent manslaughter. Not fashion, not vanity. A crime the papers covered it with morbid fascination. But by the time the story reached England, it had been spun into farce. French tragedia. Corset too many. You lie awake wondering where the line is between beauty and brutality. You're not alone. Somewhere across town, another girl, maybe one, just like you, is writing in her journal. She sketches a corset in the margins. Price, elegance. She probably won't show it to anyone, but she'll remember it as you will. Every time you gasp for air or flinch at a cough, the danger is no longer abstract. It lives in your bones, your breath, your blood, and it's only just beginning. By now, you've developed a sixth sense for the corset's presence. It isn't just the tightness sits, the way it reshapes your very awareness. You notice your posture first thing in the morning, even before rising. You avoid bending, twisting, breathing too deeply. And worse, you've learned how to smile through it, but there's something different today. It starts when you hear a name whispered among the calling cards, and polite laughter of your mother's morning visitations. Lady Agnes Moncliffe. You. Pause mid-step. She was a name from your childhood, a distant cousin with an arresting laugh and hair piled like meringue. You remember being 9 years old and watching her dance with a young lieutenant, her corset so tightly laced that she seemed to hover above the floor rather than move across it. She had vanished from society one winter season. No explanation, no scandal, it's gone. And now she's returned. The gossip is low, but fervent. She's joined the Rational Dress Society. Someone snickers. Wearing bloomers now, they say. Looks like a Greek statue and smells like eucalyptus. Other voice more thoughtful, maybe even envious murmurs. They say she can breathe. You can't help yourself. That night, with the excuse of sending your maid on an errand, you sneak to her townhouse. You expect ridicule, maybe a skeletal recluse and scandalous pantaloons. What you find instead is ... startling. She opens the door herself. No corset. Layers of whalebone and bustle. Just a long, flowing tea gown with cinched sleeves and bare ankles. You stare. Don't look so horrified, she laughs. It's not contagious. But it is, in a way. Inside, her home smells like mint and sandalwood. The windows are open. The furniture is sparse. On a polished mahogany table rests a book titled Health and Beauty Without Torture. A pamphlet peeks out from under it. Votes for women. I suppose you've come to see the spectacle, she says, gesturing to her very corsetless waist. You flush? I didn't mean to be rude. She waves you off. You're curious? That's not a crime, at least not yet. And so begins your unexpected education. You'd heard of the rational dress. Society before a fringe movement of eccentric women who believed fashion should allow for free movement, deep breathing, and sanity. Most people laughed at them, off as cranks or unmarriageable old maids. But Lady Agnes is none of those things. She talks with precision and passion. We've been told that beauty equals discipline, that suffering is elegance. But whose idea of beauty are we dying for? Not ours. Never ours. You sip weak tea and try not to stare at her waist. It's not grotesque, not ruined, just ... human. She shows you diagrams from dress reformers, adjustable corsets with elastic panels, redesigned petticoats, ankle-length bloomers for riding and cycling. Comfort doesn't mean ugliness, she says. You've just been conditioned to fear the unfamiliar. One statistic jumps out at you. An 1888 medical study claimed that over 70% of female sanatorium patients wore tightless corsets daily before their admission. Coincidence? She asks. Historians still argue, you reply half-jokingly. Whether women's madness came from their minds or their wardrobes. She nods. Madness is often just the logical response to impossible expectations. Before you leave, she takes your hands and says softly, you don't have to choose tonight, but do start choosing. You walk home in a daze, skirt swishing too loudly in the silence. And yet, something has shifted. The next morning, you loosen your corset. Strings, just 2 notches. No one notices, but you do. You take a fuller breath. You eat an entire scone without wincing. It's a small rebellion, quiet as a sigh. You tell no one. But that night, you dream of bloomers. Here's a fringe detail you won't find in your average. History lecture. Some early rational dress society. Members designed and sewed their own undergarments that resembled modern sportswear. Cotton, not silk. Gussets for movement. Adjustable ties instead of whalebone fasteners. They wore them beneath their public clothes, like hidden armor. Reformers weren't just ranting from the sidelines. They were inventing alternatives. In one famous case, the American doctor Mary Walker was arrested repeatedly for wearing trousers and a tailored jacket in public. Her indecency was hotly debated in both medical and fashion circles. But she kept walking, kept speaking, kept choosing her health over her hemline. And now, so do you. You don't throw away your corset, not yet. But you start thinking about what it would mean to let it go. You study your mother's tightly singed silhouette with new eyes. Not admiration, but concern. Been coughing more? She started rubbing her back when she thinks no one's looking. Lady Agnes sends you a letter. No return address. Inside is a single line, breathe. And for thee. First time in a long while, you do. You wake the next morning with the ghost of Lady Agnes's laughter still echoing in your mind and the gentle tug of looser laces at your ribs. 2 notches looser, to be precise, and yet it feels like you've opened a window in your chest. But as you dress, the weight of choice settles in. It's not just your corset, your tugging clothes dits. Every expectation stitched into its seams. The day proceeds with deceptive normalcy. Breakfast served, embroidery circle in the garden, your mother correcting your French pronunciation without looking up from her tatting. But you keep noticing things you never noticed before. Your cousin Eleanor excuses herself with what she calls a tightness in the lungs, and you now wonder how tight her corset is. A neighbor's daughter fainting during morning prayers suddenly feels less like delicate constitution and more like a slow-burn oxygen shortage. You've been trained not to notice, and now you can't unsee it. Later that afternoon, your governess, Miss Allen, who's worn the same prim navy bodice since the invention of Dustleans, enduring tea and whispers. You've changed your lacing. You freeze, hand half lifted. To your teacup, how could you tell? She gives the faintest smile. You're breathing from your diaphragm again. Turns out Miss Allen is a former student of Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson's public health lectures. I wore a corset so tight once I cracked a rib sneezing, she says, calmly sipping her Darjeeling. Never again, she leans back, studying you. It's a dangerous thing, you know. What is? She asked. She doesn't blink. Freely, It makes you want things. And here you'd thought freedom was something that happened all at once with a trumpet fanfare and a wardrobe fire. Instead, it's this. Someone seeing you. Naming your small rebellion. Noticing the notch that evening as you're preparing for your aunt's dinner party. Your mother's maid laces you with practiced speed, too practiced. Before you can stop her, the corset's tighter than ever, snug enough to snap your illusions. Endure the carriage ride with your hands clenched in your lap, lungs shallow. The dinner is unbearable. Dish after heavy dish, wine swirling in crystal goblets, conversations so formal you forget your own name. You pick at the roast duck, smile at the wrong moments, and excuse yourself far too soon. Upstairs, you struggle. With the laces, panic rises as each tug yields only inches. Your arms ache. Your breath hitches. You fumble. Your vision spots. And that's when Agnes appears in your head like an apparition. It's not contagious, she had joked. But maybe it is. You call your maid not the older one, but Rose. The younger girl who grew up barefoot on a tenant farm and once smuggled you a piece of gingerbread during, lent you tell her to fetch the scissors. She hesitates. Your mother will survive. She brings the scissors. You cut the laces. They fall like limp vines to the floor. You breathe. Full, dizzying, overwhelming breaths. You sit in your shift on the edge of your bed, heart pounding, ribs sore. But something in you, free. Now here's a delightful fringe detail most people miss in the 1890s. Some department stores began quietly offering respiratory corsets designed for invalids, women recovering from childbirth or hysterical episodes. These corsets were padded, flexible, and entirely optional. Women bought them, not just the sick ones, because by then, reform had become fashion's ghost, never spoken aloud, but everywhere at once, hidden beneath traveling suits. Whispered into collarbones, loosening laces behind bedroom doors. And you've joined that quiet conspiracy. The next morning, you don't lace up at all. You wear a softly boned corset instead, the kind Lady Agnes recommended, designed for comfort. Shaped for movement, your dress still fits. No one gasps. The world doesn't implode, but your gait changes. So does your smile. Historians still argue whether the dress reform movement actually reached the average woman or remained confined to middle-class radicals. But for you, the revolution isn't in pamphlets or protests. It's in being able to eat breakfast and taste it. You start watching others, noticing who breathes shallow, who stiffens when they sit. You begin to imagine a world where no one faints during prayers or hides, bruised ribs under crinoline. Lady Agnes sends you another note. This one's folded in a pamphlet titled "Muscles Are Not Unladylike." The message reads, "You're becoming quite dangerous."
Are good, you laugh.
And this time, it echoes. You thought it would be just one quiet act of rebellion. It's one night without the corset. It's one sigh of relief before returning to decorum. But now the echo won't stop. You've changed your gait. Your voice projects differently. You laugh without gasping, and people notice, though not always kindly at Sunday service. Mrs. Cratchley, who's been mouthing the Psalms for 62 years, gives you a long look when you kneel without wheezing. At your uncle's garden party, you catch a pair of matrons whispering after you walk past, unencumbered in a gown that, heaven forbid, flows naturally from the waist. Then comes the visit to the dressmaker. You've been dreading it, Madame Fournier. Your family's French seamstress has made every gown you've worn since you were 11. She is artful. She is discreet. She is also a purist, believing the hourglass silhouette is not merely beautiful, but moral. The line reflects the soul, she's fond of saying. Today, you're not wearing your usual corset. You've brought your newly discovered reform-style one instead, with its elastic inserts and boning so soft it's practically flirtatious. Madame Fournier notices the change the moment she begins to take your measurements. Her lips purse. You've deviated. I've adapted, you reply. She sniffs. It's unconventional. You lift your chin. It's breathable. Madame Fournier doesn't argue. But she does cut your hemline half an inch too short, a silent warning from the House of Discipline. Back home, you begin to hear rumors. Nothing overt, just those soft darts of Victorian gossip. A mention that you're progressive, raised brow when you speak about women's health. A distant cousin noting that your spine seems less upright these days. It's absurd, of course. You stand taller now than ever before. Still, the pressure builds. You start hiding your new corset beneath heavier bodices, quieter skirts. You let the rumors ripple without confirming or denying anything. But inside, something's changing. You start reading more. Every pamphlet on dress reform, every clipping about the Rational Dress Society. There's an essay titled The Vice of Waist Compression and the Fate of Modern Womanhood that reads like both a sermon and a love letter. You underline entire pages, and in the margins, you scribble what you've never dared say aloud. What if we stopped apologizing for taking up space? Your mother finds one of the pamphlets and folds it silently into her sewing basket. She doesn't bring it up, but the next morning, she laces you tighter than you've been in weeks. You endure it. You eat 2 bites of breakfast and excuse yourself to walk the garden until your vision clears in the roses. You see, Miss Allen, your gait has changed again, she says gently. I'm trying to go backward, you joke. Make everyone happy.
Backward?
Doesn't suit you, she replies. You've gotten used to breathing. Pause. Most women don't come back once they've known what a lungful feels like. There's truth in that. Painfully true. Here's a curious historical tidbit that doesn't make it into the textbooks. In the 1880s, a London advertisement promised a new corset made of coiled piano wire that could supposedly bend with the body's natural motion. It was marketed to working women and bicyclists. Yes, bicyclists. The product flopped. Why? It's because while it allowed movement, it didn't look restrictive enough. It didn't signal virtue. Turns out freedom only sells when it still looks like. Penance, later that week, you visit Lady Agnes again. She greets you with a knowing smile and a tray of something called corset cake, a ginger sponge so rich it defies every dietary rule of fashionable femininity. You look taller? She says. Madame Fournier says, I look unstable. Agnes laughs so loudly the maid drops a spoon. She sits you down and unrolls a bundle of fabric. Not just corsets this time, but trousers. Trousers, for women, designed for bloomers or bicycle skirts. Her voice lowers conspiratorially. There's a whole society of us now, she says. Writers, doctors, clerks, widows who've stopped caring, and daughters who've never started. We wear elastic, we wear linen. Some of us even wear, she whispers, nothing. You choke on your tea, she grins, but don't worry. We're very discreet. Mostly, you can't help it. You ask, why risk it? Agnes leans in close, because once you stop performing pain for everyone else's comfort, you start to remember who you are. Historians still argue whether women of the Victorian era truly had agency or whether rebellion was confined to literature, not real life. But here, in this parlor, you feel something living just beneath the surface. Something not documented. In fashion plates or etiquette manuals, you call it the quiet riot. When you leave that day, you walk down the street without your corset not hidden, not secret. Your waist is not singed, your spine is not forced into a question mark. And for the first time, a stranger does not look at you with scandal or suspicion. Instead, a young woman crossing the street meets your eyes, glances at your unstructured waist, and nods. Barely perceptible. But it's there, and you realize they're watching, waiting, taking note. It's not just you anymore. Your body remembers not just the bruises or the shallow breaths, but the absence of pain. It remembers what it feels like to wake without aches in your ribs, to stand without rehearsing which shoulder to roll back first, to laugh and not brace. For the echo in your spine, and this memory, it's contagious. Soon, you find yourself surrounded by small, unspoken shifts in the women around you. Your younger cousin begins loosening her stays when visiting. The cook's assistant, barely 16, tugs at her bodice strings during the morning market. Even your mother, strict as starch, begins placing hot bricks near her dressing chair, not for comfort, but for relief. Change is catching, but so is fear. Because with every new breath you claim, someone else tries to take it from you at a charity. Luncheon, Lady Templeton corners you by the teacups. She's a cathedral of fabric lace upon whalebone, her corset a masterpiece of industrial engineering. Dear, she says, her hand heavy on your arm, there are rumors you've joined those women. You blink. Which women? She leans in, powdery and scented like dried violets. The ones who don't understand decorum? You know, with the elastic, you nearly laugh. They're with the elasticass. If breathability were a criminal act, but you know better than to joke. The Victorian social machine is oiled with politeness, but built on quiet punishments. And it's always watching. Here's where things get delightfully bizarre. In 1893, an American preacher published a booklet titled Corsetry and the Devil's Architecture, where he likened tightlacing to witchcraft. To reshape God's design is to tempt Satan's delight, he thundered. He blamed everything from migraines to fainting spells on corsets, though oddly not the men who demanded them. The tract became oddly popular in both medical and suffragist circles, because apparently if God can't save you, maybe an angry clergyman can. You tuck that snippet away. It's your new favorite absurdity. At home, you start keeping a journal. It's not just a diary of complaints, but a kind of secret field guide. How to survive corset culture without going mad. Each entry is written in code, couched in metaphors. In case your brothers ever peeked. Entry 1, the ribs are a cage until you notice the door is already open. Entry 2, a well-dressed lie is still a lie. You begin to develop a double life. You still wear the stiff corset to formal events, funerals, weddings, dances, but only under protest. You rehearse excuses in the mirror. I've had a cold. The doctor advised it. Or new laundry soap irritates my skin. Little white lies. Corseted themselves. But then something strange happens. At your cousin Eleanor's engagement dinner. You forget. You wear the reform corset? The one that bends with you. Lets your stomach expand when you eat more than 3 bites. And Eleanor notices you look, she says. Fork pausing midair. Relaxed. You freeze. And then she smiles. Not with judgment, but envy. That night. She follows you into the powder room and whispers, "Where did you get it?" And you hand her the address of a little shop near Clockenwell, where the owner doesn't ask questions and stocks bolts of breathable sanity. Soon, there are more clerks, governesses, a married friend from finishing school, whose husband travels often, whose drawers now contain not 1 but 3 different reform styles. The underground is growing, and so, of course, is the backlash. 1. Morning, you open a paper and see a satirical cartoon. A woman with a flat chest and balloon hips, labeled the modern unwoman. She's drawn mid-gasp, holding a bicycle, and wearing what appears to be pants. Pants. The horror. A speech bubble hovers above her. I breathe, therefore I sin. You laugh. Then you clip it and pin it inside your journal, because here's the thing no one tells you. Ridicule is a sign you've been noticed. And ridicule always comes right before change. Historians still argue whether these shifts in dress were a true feminist revolution or just a passing health fad. Some say it all fizzled out by the 1910s. Others insist it laid the groundwork for suffrage. For trousers, even for the sports bra. But standing in your room that evening, unhooking the last clasp on your corset and letting your breath spill out. Like a river, you realize the truth doesn't always need consensus. Sometimes, truth lives in the silence between exhale and inhale. You light a lamp. Its flame flickers as the window shakes with evening wind. You walk to your vanity and see yourself not as a silhouette, but as a person. There is softness in your frame, a new line in your jaw, little curve in your belly where the bones used to press. You are not undone, you are unbound, and you decide. Tomorrow, you won't just wear comfort. You'll speak it. To the butcher's wife. To the florist's niece. To the lady at the dressmaker's who always laces the corsets to holes too tight. Not with sermons, not with slogans, just with breath. And honesty, and maybe, just maybe, a touch of scandal. You speak your truth for the first time at the seamstress's shop. It's a quiet Tuesday. It's a kind where the rain doesn't fall so much as it mists sideways. You duck inside the dim little room where Mrs. Arkwright measures and pins gowns for half the neighborhood. Young ladies and all their mothers. She's already halfway through marking up a wedding bodice when she squints at you. Back again, are we? She says, brushing chalk dust from her fingertips. Is it another snagged lace? Or did the elastic rebel? You smile. I've come to order something, specific. Her eyebrows arch. You wait for the pause to stretch just enough before adding, I want a reform corset. No whalebone, light boning, breathable. I'll even bring the fabric. The room stills like someone's just insulted the queen. Mrs. Arkwright straightens, purses her lips, and then surprisingly chuckles. You're not the first this month. It's the lungs, isn't it? Everyone's suddenly worried about their lungs. She leads you behind the curtain. You hadn't realized how many spools of elastic trim she's stocked recently. She's hedging her bets, it seems. Do you know how many times I've stitched young girls into garments they couldn't sit down in? She mutters, her voice low now. Not one of them dared ask for this. You nod, feeling the weight of it. By the time she finishes your measurements, you've shared stories. Not just your own, others too. The cousin, the assistant, the one with the bicycle. Mrs. Arkwright, bless her calloused hands, promises to make you 3 reform corsets in different shades, so no one notices you're wearing them again. And again, she says with a wink, you leave lighter. The rain hasn't stopped. But now it feels like something cleansing. Maybe even brave. Over the next weeks, your voice starts threading into conversations like ribbon through eyelets. At a supper with your brother's fiancé, you gently ask if her headaches have anything to do with that double-laced silk monstrosity she wears to church. At the bakery, you hear 2 young maids giggling over a copy of the Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine, where a writer claims fainting is simply a sign of refined nerves. You scoff loud enough to catch their attention, and murmur, or poor circulation. And at a women's reading group, you raise your hand and say, why are we still pretending that comfort and beauty must fight each other? One woman claps, another blushes. A third writes your words in the margin of her pamphlet. Historians still debate whether these small rebellions were radical or just ripples in a larger tide. But in the moment, they feel colossal. Meanwhile, outside your little circle of light, the world wobbles toward progress. In France, a few salons begin hosting natural posture evenings where women lounge in looser silhouettes and discuss poetry. Across the Atlantic, the Rational Dress Society releases an updated manifesto, claiming that health and grace need not be enemies. American catalogs quietly begin advertising hygienic undergarments to middle-class housewives. But change is never graceful. You learn this at the assembly ball. It's a grand affair, candles everywhere. The orchestra a full dozen strong, the gowns starched within an inch of their lives. You wear your reform corset under a soft burgundy satin gown. You've made peace with the fact that it doesn't cinch your waist like a wasp. You look real. It's not exaggerated, not distorted. And that's precisely the problem. A man you've danced with once before, naval officer, clean-shaven and arrogant, takes your hand for a quadrille. But halfway through, he mutters, you've grown sturdy since last season. Lands like a slap, or for its casual cruelty than its volume. You almost laugh, sturdy, as if you were a wagon. You finish the dance, without stumbling once. You even thank him. But your hands tremble slightly as you excuse yourself and flee to the edge of the ballroom behind a fern. There, you find a surprised Eleanor, red-faced, panting slightly, unbuttoning her gloves. I can't breathe, she mutters. Mother made me double lace. Said I looked bloated in last week's sketches. You look around. No one's watching. You slip into the coat room together. There you undo the laces at the back of her corset while she bites her lip and gasps with relief. Inch by inch, her body softens. Her ribs reclaim space, and her eyes fill with tears, not from sadness, but sheer relief. I want what you have, she whispers. You nod. Then don't let them take it again. That's the turning point. You realize finally that breath isn't just biology, it's rebellion. And giving it back to another woman? That's revolution in your journal that night. You write entry 8. When she unfastened the final hook, I saw not just ribs, but wings. And though you are bone-tired and sore from dancing in shoes far too pointy, you sleep that night with a smile tucked under your pillow. Let the men whisper. Let the cartoons mock. Let the duchesses shudder. You are no longer dressing for them. You are dressing for the version of you that laughs without fainting. Who eats pudding and stands tall? Who dances not like she's performing, but like she's free. And in the end, that's the version that deserves to be seen. 2 summers later, you barely recognize yourself in the mirror, but in the best way. Not because of some miraculous transformation in your figure. Quite the opposite, in fact. You've relaxed into your own shape, the way a well-worn glove molds to a hand. Your waist no longer pinches in when you breathe, and the purple crescents that used to rim your ribs have faded into memory. But more than that, your gaze has changed, steadier, kinder, even when you look at your own reflection. You notice it first at the station. You're helping Eleanor, now firmly a convert to the reform dress cause, onto a train bound for Liverpool. She's joined a women's cycling club, yes? One of those, and her canvas knickerbockers swish beneath her coat as she climbs aboard. She's beaming. Fully laced, she would have fainted halfway up the steps, but today, she practically bounds. You're going to be late for the rally? She reminds you, poking your shoulder with a grin. Right. The rally? You've been invited. No. It's meant to speak at a women's health symposium in a church hall just outside town. At first, you thought the letter was a mistake. Surely they meant to invite a doctor, or at least someone whose name was printed in ink somewhere more official than the bottom of a pamphlet. But it's you. Your notes, your words. Story, as you hurry to the meeting hall, skirts lifted slightly above your sensible boots, you try to remember the opening line of your speech. But your mind keeps drifting to something else. How far things have come, and how absurd they still are. Historians still argue whether this period marks a genuine shift or just a fashionable flirtation with change. Reform corsets rise in popularity. Yes, but so do designer models labeled semi-rigid or light compression, which still squeeze under the pretense of health. Some brands even stitch in ventilation eyelets and call themselves breath-friendly, as if that compensates for the damage. Progress by half measures. But as you step into that hall, filled with women of all ages clutching notebooks and fans and little paper handkerchiefs, you feel the air shift. You begin softly, no need for bravado. You talk about being 15 and gasping in church, about the bruises hidden under brocade, about the night you first loosened the laces and realized that freedom doesn't always arrive with a trumpet, it sometimes comes with a breath. You hear sniffles. A stifled laugh. One woman mutters, "God, yes." Under her breath, when you mention the indignity of trying to sneeze in full boning by the end. They're clapping not thunderously, but earnestly. The kind of applause that means someone sees you. Someone heard you. Afterward, a young mother lingers behind. She's got her baby in a sling, and a medical pamphlet tucked under her arm. She hesitates for a moment before asking, "Is it true? Is that your lungs actually move position when you're tightly laced?" You nod. Upward. Compressed. Your stomach gets flattened. Organs get squished. She winces. "I always wondered, why? I felt dizzy after lunch." You offer her your copy of the corset question, complete with margin notes and underlining. She takes it like it's a candle in the dark. "Thank you," she whispers, "for saying what no one says." The thing is, people are starting to say it. You hear it more and more at tea shops, at coupes, even whispered behind velvet curtains in department stores. One sales assistant says, "There's a new line of French elastic stays that aren't too wicked."
Ass.
And her coworker replies, "Or you could just stop suffering altogether." Sure, the upper crust still postures. Corsets as class. Corsets as control butt cracks are spreading across the lacquer. And for once, the women downwind of fashion aren't just imitating it, they're remaking it. You visit a small tailoring school in the East End and find a dozen young women learning to cut patterns for health corsets. Not only are they cheaper, they're faster to sew. And one girl shows you a model made from linen and horsehair instead of steel or whalebone. You laugh out loud. "Won't that itch?" She shrugs. Better itchy than breathless. It's hard to argue with that. Still, you're no fool. For every reformer, there are 10 gatekeepers. In newspapers, cartoons mock the new silhouette as boxy, manly, vulgar. Doctors almost all male warn that corset abandonment could lead to weakness of posture or emotional instability. One clergyman goes so far as to declare a woman ungirdled is a nation unmoored. You write in your journal, Entry 13. We fear our bones shifting because it means we're no longer willing to shift ourselves. And yet, in the privacy of your own home, you still find yourself reaching for structure sometimes. Not out of vanity, but out of habit. There's a curious comfort in the ritual, in the soft tug of lacing, the way it gathers you. But now, the difference is this. You choose when and why. You choose how tight, you choose if at all, and choice. That's the thing you never had before, so yes. Sometimes you wear one of Mrs. Arkwright's flexible wonders under your Sunday dress, but other times you don't. And when people comment on your appearance on your waist, your stance, the way your bust line looks in profile, you no longer flinch. You say, with perfect calm, I like breathing. Most don't know what to do. With that, you leave them blinking, half charmed, half confused. You don't explain, you don't apologize, and that silence is power. Evening descends in that slow, golden way it sometimes does in early autumn, stretching the shadows, softening the bricks, gilding the rooftops with a sleepy haze. You're walking home from the tailor's workshop, your bag swinging loosely. From your shoulder, when a familiar scent stops you in your tracks. Lavender, you glance to your right. There's a young girl leaning out of a second-floor window, arms dangling like ivy. Her stays are drying on the line beside Herslim. White. Modestly boned and, the breeze lifts the hem of her smock in little teasing gusts. She grins when she sees you and calls out something you can't quite hear. She reminds you of yourself. 2 years ago, eager, hungry, unaware of the cost, yet already wearing the currency on her ribs. A bell chimes distantly. You keep walking it. Home, your mother is waiting with a pot of weak tea and an expression somewhere between concern and exasperation. She's wearing one of your old corsets, tight, upright, unfazed. It's strange, seeing it on her frame now, as though your past had decided to host a séance in your sitting room. You gave that up, she says, nodding toward your bag. Did. You've stitched 4 of them this week. You stir your tea without answering. She sighs. You'll never fix all of them, you know. You look up. I don't need to fix everyone. Just give them the option.
Oh.
She doesn't reply, but she doesn't argue either. Progress. That night, you unroll your fabric stash bolt after bolt. Of cotton, ticking, soft-woven muslin. You trace patterns with chalk, cutting gently. You've learned to sew corsets that bend. Corsets that breathe. No whalebone, no steel. Just a web of support that doesn't strangle a woman from the neighborhood comes by the next morning. Her name is Ida. She's in her mid-40s, face weathered, arms strong from years of laundry work. She's never worn a corset in her life, couldn't afford one. But now she wants one. I've got bad posture, she mutters, embarrassed. My back hurts by the end of the day. You look her up and down. Her body tells its own story, stooped shoulders, calloused hands. Skin dusted with starch and sun. You measure her with a loose tape, fingers moving quickly. Let's make you something light, flexible like scaffolding, not a prison. She smiles, half in disbelief. You're not going to cinch me in? You grin, only if you ask very, very nicely. There's a myth you've come to learn, that corsets were only about vanity, that women wore them out of foolish pride or to trap husbands. But here, in your little back room with Ida and her aching spine, that myth crumbles. The truth is slipperier, messier. Some wore corsets because they had 2 jobs required a certain silhouette. Others wore them because it was expected, because deviating from the norm meant ridicule or suspicion, or in some cases unemployment. Historians still debate how much autonomy working-class women really had in their dress. Some argue that corsets were symbolic of aspiration, not oppression. Others claim it was nothing but thinly disguised torture. The reality? Probably somewhere in between. While you pin the pieces for Ida's garment, she tells you about her niece 14. And already being told to pull herself together, code for lace tighter. I want to bring her here, Ida says. Show her she's not broken. And just like that, your little room becomes a quiet sanctuary. Women start to arrive in twos and threes. Some come for fittings. Some just come to sit, to share stories. There's Agnes, who jokes that she had to lie down to button her wedding course. A tan didn't stand up until the honeymoon. There's Florence, who secretly cut the side seams of hers during a long Easter service and walked out 2 inches wider, and twice as happy. You host tea once a week now, surrounded by patterns and pastries. Someone always brings lemon cake. Someone always forgets the sugar. But no one forgets to breathe. One evening, a young man pokes his head in. He's holding a parcel and looking wildly out of place. Corduroy jacket, nervous energy, ink-stained fingertips. Are you Missa? Are you the corset lady? You raise an eyebrow. Depends. Am I in trouble? He blushes. No, I'm with the newspaper. We're running a feature on the health movement. I thought, maybe I could ask a few questions. He ends up staying for 2 hours. You talk about fashion, yes, but also about anatomy. About the politics of the body. About the quiet rebellion of women refusing to sacrifice their organs for a silhouette. You make him try on a child's training corset just for fun. He laughs until he can't laugh anymore, literally. As he leaves, gasping dramatically, he says, "You should write something, not just pamphlets. Something big." You smile. Maybe I already am. Later, you scribble in your journal. Entry 17. What began as survival now feels like stewardship. That night, you lie in bed under a half-moon sky. The air is cool, full of whispering leaves and distant horse carts. You press your hands to your stomach and feel the soft rise of breath. No pressure, no tightness, just the gentle rhythm of lungs remembering they have room. You think of that girl in the window again. You hope she finds her way to your door. You wake to the scent of damp linen and beeswax, another fog-soaked morning in the city. The walls of your little workroom sweat gently, and your fingers ache with the familiar pull of morning chill. There's a comfort in this routine, though. The hiss of the kettle, the whisper of fabric as it unrolls, steady beat of needle into cotton. But something's off today. You can feel it even before the knock on your door. It's not Ida, not Florence or Agnes or any of the neighborhood. Women who've become your quiet little revolutionaries. No, this knock is firm, official. The kind of knock that expects to be obeyed. You open the door to find 2 men standing on your stoop. Tall black coats. One carries a clipboard. The other wears the kind of mustache that exists solely to judge. You're Miss. Depends, you say automatically, because sarcasm is a survival instinct now. Clipboard clears his throat. We've received reports that you've been manufacturing and distributing unlicensed garments. You blink. Unlicensed? Corsets. Not cannonballs. He ignores the joke. Are you registered with the guild? Ah, that old. Tune C. The Tailors Guild is not fond of disruption. They believe in standards, regulations, most of all. They believe in their designs, tight-laced, ironclad, and profitable. What you've been doing making corsets that prioritize health, comfort, choice that's starting to feel dangerously like rebellion? Mustache takes a step forward. You'll need to cease production until you can prove certification. Or will be forced to confiscate your materials, shut down your premises. You don't remember slamming the door. But the sound echoes long after they're gone. Later at tea, your regulars are furious. Ida nearly spills her mug. They've got a nerve. She snaps. Calling you dangerous when they've been squeezing our kidneys since 1803? Agnes leans forward, voice low. There's talk of reform. A new bill, health protections for factory workers. Maybe even dress regulations. You frown. That's good, isn't it? In theory, she says. But guess who's lobbying behind it? Corset manufacturers. They want to codify their designs, make it law. Ah, There it is again, power masquerading as protection. Historians still argue whether the push for dress reform in the late 19th century was truly about women's health or just another way for men to police women's bodies under the guise of progress. On one hand, there were physicians speaking up. On the other, businessmen eager to monopolize whatever came next. The danger wasn't the corset itself. It was the lack of agency surrounding it. You decide to take a walk. Clear your head. You cut through the public gardens where children in loose frocks chase one another around a duck pond, their laughter rising in the mist like cathedral bells. And that's where you see her, the girl from the window. She's on a bench, a sketchbook on her knees, a pencil gripped too tightly in one ink-stained hand. She looks up, startled when you sit beside her. "You," she says. "The seamstress." You nod. "You were drying your corset out the window," she blushes. "I thought it looked poetic." It did. It's very Sylvia the Tragic Poet vibes. She giggles. "I hated it, the corset." You nod again. She flips the sketch pad around to show you a charcoal drawing. It's a woman wide-hipped, soft-stomached, arms raised in joy. No corset. No shame. She's beautiful, you whisper. "She's me," she says. "Or who I want to be." You don't ask permission. You just hug her. She lets you. By the time you return home, the decision is made. You're not going to stop sewing, but you are going to stop hiding. The next day, you hang a sign outside your shop. Fitting room for the free. Custom corsets for comfort, not conformity. But within a week, the guild sends another letter. Threatening, condescending, impeccably. Typeset, you frame it. Hang it right above your sewing machine. Customers keep coming. A journalist visits again, this time with a photographer. You pose in front of a row of half-finished corsets, arms crossed, eyebrow arched. The headline reads, "Radical Stitches. One woman's fight against the tight-lacing tyrants." You're slightly annoyed it doesn't rhyme. Soon, women from other cities begin writing to you. They want patterns, guidance, solidarity. You oblige, sending out stenciled templates with little notes tucked inside. Trust your body. It's smarter than the fashion police. You're allowed to take up space. Never underestimate the revolution hidden in a waistband. One evening, just before dusk, a package arrives. No return address. Inside, a corset. Victorian, pristine, viciously tight-laced. But someone has embroidered across the front in crimson thread, "I choose." It makes you cry. You wear it once over your dress, as a badge, and then hang it in the window like a war flag. That night, you write in your journal, entry 22, "They thought corsets controlled us. Turns out we were just waiting to reclaim them." And outside, the fog rolls in again, thick and soft and quiet. But this time it feels less like suffocation. It's more like a blanket. It starts with a whisper. A woman in Leeds writes to a friend in Brighton. A governess in York slips a folded paper into the pocket of her employer's cook. A student in Edinburgh sketches something between anatomy and architecture, her own version of a corset that breathes, that moves, that lives. And before long, these whispers become a current. It's flowing underground across counties and class divides. You, still hunched at your workbench, are quietly becoming infamous. The postman eyes you differently now, half scandal, half curiosity. You receive more mail than the mayor, most of it addressed in careful, looping script, to the seamstress who dared. Inside, confessions spill like perfume. "I danced for the first time in years. I stood up to my husband. I ran for her." The trainand didn't faint. The stories are raw, proud, sometimes heartbreaking. You keep every letter in a biscuit tin under your bed. Some nights when sleep won't come, you read them aloud by candlelight. They are your fuel, but not everyone is cheering. The backlash has grown bolder. Anonymous. Notes slip through your door. You're poisoning the youth. Shame on you. One morning, you find a crude effigy of ragdoll tied in corset strings, hung from your shop sign like a warning. You untie it gently. It stroke the yarn hair, then set it on your windowsill next to a daffodil. "Nice try," you mutter. Needs better stitching. Meanwhile, the newspapers have caught wind of something they don't quite understand but know how to sell. call you the bodice heretic, the stays breaker, needle nuisance. You cut the clippings out and use them as wrapping paper for corset scent. Abroad, historians still debate whether your movement qualifies as first-wave feminism or simply a protest stitched in cotton. But to you, labels are distractions. This isn't about terminology, it's about transformation. Then one afternoon, a sketching girl from the park Clara returns, breathless. They're organizing, she says, cheeks pink with rage. Public debate. Town hall, this Saturday. Corsets? On you. And your dangerous influence on the feminine mind? You laugh. Well, can't have women thinking, can we? Clara isn't laughing. They've invited doctors, tailors, clergy. You arch a brow. Any actual women? One. But she's a baroness, who once said women should only speak in rhyme and whispers. You sigh. Still you go, you put on your plainest skirt, your softest boots, and one of your most flexible corsets, the blue one with the hidden pocket for peppermint. Drops in courage. The town hall is packed. Mostly men. Some wide-eyed girls. A smattering of middle-aged women clenching handkerchiefs in tight, judgmental fists. The first speaker is a physician with spectacles too small for his face. He delivers a solemn lecture on the dangers of spinal, curvature, organ displacement, and moral collapse. Corsetry, he intones, is not just fashion, it is discipline. Without it, women unravel. You murmur to Clara, unraveling sounds nice. Then comes the Tailor Guild certified, obviously. He presents a chart, all angles and math, explaining the optimal waistline, husband happiness ratio. The audience titters. Finally, the Baroness. She's wearing something so tight she speaks like a hiccuping mouse. It is unseemly. Your turn? You rise slowly, heart tap dancing. In your throat, you take no notes. No charts, just breath. Tonight, you say, we've heard a lot about what women should do, how they ought to feel, what their bones are meant to do inside a cage. And yet none of these experts have worn one. A ripple runs through the room. You reach into your bag and pull out 2 corsets. This, you say, holding up a rigid boned piece, is what most women are expected to wear. It bruises ribs, compresses lungs, creates the illusion of perfection by punishing the body. Gasps. Then you lift the second, softer, curved, hand-stitched with subtle elasticity. This is what we could wear. A hush. This one lets you walk, laugh, breathe. It doesn't whisper you're too much, it says. You're enough. A pause. Now tell me which one's really dangerous. Clara claps first, then a girl in the back row. More. The room explodes, not just in noise, but in release, as though generations of silence suddenly fractured. Of course, not everyone applauds. A man in the front row shakes his head, muttering about hysteria. But you've seen what hysteria looks like in this. This is liberation in linen. That night, you walk home beneath a moon the color of milk. You take off your boots and walk barefoot for the last few streets, feeling each crack in the cobblestones. You whisper to the night, I choose softness, and the night seems to answer, so do we. You don't set out to start a revolution, but somehow one follows you home. It begins with the local girls. Clara, of course, always buzzing around with scissors in her hair and ink stains on her cuffs. But then others trickle in, laundress. From the outskirts, the librarian's apprentice with her mother's pincushion, even the baker's teenage daughter, who admits while needing Duthat corsets make her feel like she's suffocating into someone else's life. You clear? Out the back room of your shop, hang linen strips along the walls like banners. Lay out scissors, chalk, old velvet buttons. Soon, it doesn't feel like a workshop anymore. It feels like a salon. Not the Parisian kind, dripping in absinthe and pretension. The messy kind. The kind with laughter and spilled tea, and someone inevitably sewing the ribbon on backward. You name it, the stays-free society as a joke at first. But the name sticks. Meetings happen weekly, then twice weekly, then nightly. Women take turns reading aloud from anatomy books and radical pamphlets. Someone brings a newspaper clipping about a German corset model who allegedly fainted into a candelabra. Historians still argue, Clara says, biting her lip, whether that story was true or Victorian fan fiction. You all decide it doesn't matter, it feels true. Because even if you haven't collapsed into a flaming sconce, you've felt the slow smoldering damage corsets leave behind, the shortness of breath, the acid in the throat, the stiffness that settles in your hips and stays for days. And worst of all, the shrinking of self. Not just the waistline, but the room you allow yourself to take up. One evening, a guest arrives, a woman in her 40s with wild gray curls and a disarming laugh. She introduces herself only as Aunt Marjorie, and by dessert, she's all ready. Telling stories about black market bloomers in Paris. She used to be a stage actress, she says. Had ribs like lace from years of cinching. One broke during a final bow. She kept smiling, blood in her mouth. That was the moment, she says, dabbing at her teacup. I realized applause wasn't worth agony. You ask her to stay. Night. She stays the week. Soon, Aunt Marjorie is helping design your next prototype corsetta, bold one with open sides, double lacing, and a cheeky row of hidden pockets. For secrets, she winks and snacks. But word gets out. Not just locally, everywhere one day. You receive a parcel postmarked New York, inside a sample of a Liberty corset, covered in blue paisley and lined in what feels suspiciously like soft whale baleen. The note attached reads, "Saw your name in the Ladies' Weekly, thought we'd trade secrets." Another arrives from a woman in Prague, along with a sketch of a corset built to expand with the breath. Ingenious. You pin every letter and sketch to a corkboard in the shop, which grows so crowded you have to tack some to the ceiling. Clara starts referring to it as the Archive of Liberation. Not everyone's pleased. The local corset guild, yes. There is one holds a meeting titled Preserving the Proper Silhouette. You're not invited. But your name is mentioned 10 times, according to a source who may or may not be. Marjorie in a bonnet and mustache. There's a satirical cartoon in the paper. You as a corset unraveler, surrounded by shrieking women in bloomers, torching mannequins. You cut it out, frame it, and hang it beside the till. But then something you never expected. Your old teacher, Mrs. Brixley, arrives one foggy morning. Hunched in posture but still upright in pride. She steps into your shop, fingers the edge of a half-stitched corset, and says, "This fabric breathes." You nod. She doesn't apologize for calling you impossible. She doesn't have to. Instead, she pulls out a rust-colored corset from her satchel, the one she's worn for decades. "Can you remake this?" she asks, eyes bright. You smile. "With pleasure." That afternoon, you both sew in silence. When it's finished, she holds it up like a newborn lamb. "It's lighter than I imagined," she says. You reply, "Freedom usually is." Weeks pass. Seasons nudge in. The corsets you design are no longer hidden under clothes. They're part of the fashion now, over blouses, paired with trousers. Laced in colors as defiant as the women who wear them, and then the unthinkable. You receive an invitation from the Queen's chambermaid, a private commission, no fanfare, no signature. It's just a quiet request for something breathable, discreet, and elegant. Along with the very precise measurements of a very high-waisted someone, you laugh until you cry, then cry until you laugh. The monarchy, it seems, is not immune to the pinch. You sew it yourself. Pale blue, pearl buttons, lined in cotton soft enough for lullabies. When you send it off, you include a note. Even queens deserve to breathe. Later, Aunt Marjorie will swear she saw a glimpse of it peeking out beneath a royal gown. No one can confirm. But Clara it in a woodcut titled, "The Empress Has Inhaled." That winter. You host a masquerade. Every woman must wear a corset of her own design. The town hall fills with shimmer and swish, with laughter that sounds like lace unraveling. Even the librarian shows up in a scarlet piece embroidered with book titles. You, of course, were nothing. No stays, no laces, just a long velvet robe, and your bare lungs, full and proud. At midnight, you raise a toast to softness, to strength, and to staying exactly as we are. The corset doesn't vanish overnight, you know that? For every woman dancing at your masquerade in a ribbon-laced bodice of her own creation, or dozens more, still stuck in the rigid embrace of whalebone and steel, convinced that pain is beauty and breath is a luxury. But something has shifted, not just in your town, or even your country, but in the invisible threads that link fashion to power, to control, to choice. Still, the backlash simmers. One rainy morning, you wake to find your shop windows smeared with paint words scrawled in hasty red. Unfeminine, indecent, dangerous. The irony, of course, makes you laugh, as if the true danger was a little extra airflow near the kidneys. Clara scrubs at the glass, muttering curses that technically violate your PG-13 narration you let her. Marjorie, meanwhile, brews tea like it's a battle strategy, and you pen a note to the editor of the local paper, short, sharp, entitled "Let Women Breathe." It runs the following Sunday beside a letter denouncing your work as an affront to tradition. That letter is unsigned. You suspect the butcher's wife. You carry on. The new year brings new patrons. Women with trembling hands, teenage girls, escorted by stern aunties, even a midwife who whispers, "If I'd worn one of these with my first pregnancy, I might have kept the baby." You don't ask questions. You just help her find the softest fabric in the shop and lace it yourself. One evening, a girl no older than 14 tiptoes and holding a corset so tight it could double as a violin case. Her name is Elsie. Her ribs poke out like piano keys. She says her father insists she'll wear it until marriage. You help her out of it. Slowly, carefully. She gasps when it's undone, shoulders trembling, air flooding into places it hasn't reached in years. Feels like cheating, she says. No, you reply. It feels like healing. She doesn't leave with a corset. It's just a pamphlet, a hug, and a promise. She can come back any time. You start giving small talks at local gatherings. Clara calls them corset salons, which makes them sound much more glamorous than folding chairs and stale biscuits. Still, women come and listen. You hold up old corset x-rays, show diagrams of displaced organs. Read first-hand accounts of women who bled from the inside out just to please a husband or worse, a mirror. Historians still argue whether Queen Alexandra ever fainted at her coronation. You say at one gathering, but they all agree her corset was tightened to within an inch of collapse. A woman in the front row clutches her pearls and quietly begins loosening her own stays. You teach them how to measure themselves properly, how to breathe while lacing, how to prioritize comfort, not conformity, but the strangest ripple of all. The men, they begin showing up. Not in droves, not all supportive, but curious. A doctor arrives from Liverpool to observe your fittings. A reporter from the Times shows up in a cravat and a scowl, looking for scandal. He leaves with a pair of side-laced suspenders and a notebook full of epiphanies. Even a young tailor, shy man named Edgar, asks to apprentice under you. "I want to learn to stitch for freedom, not vanity," he says. You let him sweep the floors first. It's just a bee. Sure, some men, of course, sneer from a distance. You overhear one in the bakery mutter, "What's next? Brassieres for barn animals?" Another complains your influence is turning his wife into a mouthy bloomer wearer. You buy his wife a blooming peony corset the following week. She thanks you with shortbread and a wink. But the real proof of change comes quietly. You begin to see corsets fade from the shadows of fear and into the light of expression on the street. A woman in a lavender corset worn like a waistcoat. At church, a young girl wears one under her dress knot to flatten her figure, but to support a weak back.
Added, tailored to her shape with love, not shame. Even schoolgirls begin sketching their own designs corsets with clever pouches with embroidery
Of sunflowers and slogans like "Air, please, or no ribs were harmed." Your world, once cinched tight and stitched shut, is beginning to breathe. But success, you realize, doesn't come with a parade. It arrives like morning fog, soft, creeping, irreversible. It's in the way Clara now stands tall, without flinching. In the way Marjorie hums while sewing ribs intact. In the way Elsie returns weeks later with her father's permission to wear whatever she pleases. She picks a pale green corset with ivy stitching. It's for me, she says, not him. That night, as you're tidying bolts of muslin and picking threads off the counter, a courier arrives. He hands you a package tied with gold ribbon. No note. Just a return address. Buckingham Palace. Inside is the same sky blue corset you made months ago. But this time, it's been carefully, expertly modified. Softer boning, extra length for movement. A discreet row of pearls along the hem dotted beneath. A second corset. One you didn't make. It's a replica of your design. Not for royalty this time, for distribution. Attached. A new note in the finest handwriting you've ever seen. Comfort is no longer a rebellion. It's a right. Your hands shake slightly. You place the corsets gently in your workroom, heart thudding like a needle on cloth dot outside. The town is quiet, but in your lungs, in your bones, in every inch of fabric you've ever dared to soften. You feel it. Change doesn't need permission. It only needs breath. Spring arrives with the scent of new fabric and overturned soil. You're restocking muslin bolts when Marjorie bursts in, cheeks flushed. They want you in Paris, she says, waving a telegram like it's a winning lottery ticket. Expo or other. You're to present your designs internationally. You blink. Slowly, Clara drops a pincushion. Edgar walks into a door. It's that kind of moment. Me. You ask as if there's another corset reformer hiding behind the sewing dummy. Yes, you. 2 weeks later, you're on a steam train to Dover with trunks of corsets and a head full of nerves. Clara comes with you, of course, she disarmed with. Travel biscuits in a French phrasebook she will never actually open. Marjorie stays to manage the shop. Edgar promises to behave. You leave them detailed instructions and 3 backup corset patterns just in case someone tries to sue you for liberating the lungs. Paris is ... Paris. It's lace and cobblestone, perfume and pretension. The exhibition. Hall smells of roses and ambition. Stall after stall of fashion luminaries from across the globe. You're sandwiched. Between a Swedish wool weaver and an Italian glove maker, no one knows your name, yet your first display? A mannequin in a side-laced underbust, soft-stayed corset embroidered with tiny violets. No waist pinching, no organ warping. Just breathable elegance, some scoff. One particularly angular Parisian whispers, looks like undergarments for milkmaids. You whisper back. Milkmaids need comfort too. You charm a few skeptics, then a few more. Then dash unexpectedly a quiet woman in a heavy velvet cloak pauses at your stall. She is ink-stained. Fingers, sharp eyes, and a French accent so crisp it could slice a croissant. I edit, La femme moderne, she says. Your work interests me. Tell me, is it true what I've heard, that you refuse to sell corsets under 15 inches? You nod. I prefer my customers breathing, she laughs. You're dangerous. Yes, you reply, but only 2. Patriarchy. She publishes a glowing review 2 days later. After that, things snowball. Orders from Vienna, quests from Istanbul, whispered invitation to meet with the French minister's wife. One evening, you even speak on a panel, The Future of Women's Foundations, next to a inventor who's trying to market adjustable bust supports for postpartum mothers. Historians still argue whether his contraption or your corsets stole the show. But most agree the panel's standing ovation marked a turning point in undergarment history. You return home not triumphant, exactly, but transformed. Clara's quiet on the train ride back. At one point she asks, do you ever worry they'll twist your designs into something you never meant? You've seen it before, after all. Corsets began as linen wraps, soft, supportive, and then someone decided tighter was better, smaller, meaner, more profitable. But this time you're watching, you've patented 3 designs. You've hired apprentices. You've started a publication, The Breathing Room, full of tips, patterns, and stories from real women unlearning pain. One of your favorite contributors, Elsie, she writes, under the pen name Spine and Dandelion. Her first article unlaced. At 14, a memoir receives dozens of letters, mostly from mothers. One includes a photograph of a daughter smiling, corsetless, holding a puppy named Buster, that one you frame. Meanwhile, Clara surprises you by designing a line of maternity corsets. They're stretchable, adjustable. One even has hidden pockets. You ask if she's expecting. She turns beet red and throws a spool at your head. The answer's yes, and just like that, your legacy grows legs. Even Edgar, who once stitched sleeves backwards, becomes a trusted assistant. He proposes a men's version of your breathable corset. For posture, he insists, and dignity, make him prototype it. He looks quite dashing, truth be told. But then, inevitably, the pushback returns. A prominent fashion magazine runs a scathing editorial titled, "Are Women Losing Their Shape?" One columnist rants, "Without corsets, what separates the ladies from the laundresses?" You resist the urge to send him a laundry bill. Instead, you publish a rebuttal. Our shape is ours to choose. It includes testimonials from real women ballerinas, librarians, factory workers, each describing the first time they wore something made for comfort. Not control, the magazine doesn't print a retraction. It doesn't run another anti-corsets liberation piece either. And then, as if to crown your journey, something utterly absurd happens. You're nominated for a royal design. Metal, your name, engraved, in actual metal, it's surreal. You think of your first needle, your calloused fingers, the cracked window in your old attic workroom, the countless women who left your shop breathing easier than when they arrived at the ceremony. You wear a soft satin blouse and a silk vest corset you stitched by hand. The metal is pinned just below your collarbone. The presenter, an elderly woman in a loose navy gown, leans in and whispers, "You changed more than corsets, dear. You changed mornings." You don't fully understand until days later, sipping tea by your window. Outside, a girl skips by with her blouse tucked loosely over a ribless frame. She's whistling, breathing deeply, glowing like the sunrise. You realize what the woman meant. Mornings are no longer dreaded, no longer tight-laced rituals of pain. They're fresh, free. B-R-E-A-T-H-A-B. L-ed, and while corsets haven't vanished, entirely some are still worn. Even adored, they're worn by choice, not by demand. You helped make that possible, not with fire, not with fury, but with thread and patience and truth. You wake to a knock at the door. It's not urgent, not the pounding of catastrophe, but soft and steady, like something polite trying to find its way in. Claire is already up, humming in the kitchen. You pad to the door in woolen slippers. Open it and find Marjorie holding a parcel the size of a bread box. She's grinning. "From Boston," she says, pushing it into your arms. "A corset society. Apparently, they're obsessed with you." You blink. "Which one?" She shrugs.
I
"Lost count. But they want you to speak, and maybe design a line. Possibly name a museum wing after you."
like that.
Inside the box, letters, hand-stitched samples, even a corset journal with your actual face on the cover. The title reads, "The Woman Who Let Us Breathe." You hold the paper to your chest, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Clara votes for both. She insists on baking a pie to mark the occasion. This is where things get complicated, because famreal, international fame, doesn't arrive quietly. It comes with porters, paperwork, and opinion columns. You try to stay grounded. You still run your shop. You still patch seams. You still yell at Edgar for using too much starch. But now, reporters visit. They sit in your parlor and ask loaded questions. Do you see yourself as a feminist? Are corsets a symptom or a cause? How do you respond to rumors you're designing for men now? That last one is true, technically. Edgar's line is selling. Some journalists paint you as a radical. Others call you a traitor to femininity. One newspaper dubs you the bosom liberator of Britain. But you hate so much it loops back around to being hilarious. You try to correct the record when you can. But mostly, you let the corsets speak, and they do. One of your newer designs, a 4-panel side-lace soft stay named the Rose, becomes a sensation among performers. Opera singers swear by it. One soprano writes to you, "I hit a high F without fainting for the first time in my life. You frame that too, and yet as your influence grows, so do your critics. A group of surgeons publishes a pamphlet, The Myth of the Corset Menace. They claim corsets never hurt anyone. That hysteria is a far greater threat to women's health than tightlacing. Clara calls it medical gaslighting. You call it cowardice, but it works. Sales dip for the first time in months. You overhear? Women whispering in the market, maybe it's not the corsets, maybe we're just too delicate. You can't let that stand, so you organize a demonstration, not a march, something more delicious. You invite women to your shop for a corset swap. They bring their old steel trap monstrosities, exchange them for breathable alternatives, and sign their names on a massive linen scroll stitched with the words, I choose air. Within a week, 300 names within a month, over 1,000.lc visits to document the event. She takes photos, interviews, participants, even sneaks in a poem, My Waist, Myself. She reads it aloud at a tea salon and receives a standing ovation and 3 job offers. Historians still argue whether the I Choose Air scroll qualifies as the first modern feminist petition. Some insist it was just retail marketing. Others call it revolutionary textile activism. You just call it Tuesday still. The backlash sharpens. A reverend's wife calls your corsets temptations sewn in satin. A politician demands that your designs be labeled moral contaminants. Your postman starts delivering threats along with thread samples. You consider quitting. Just for a second, a half second. Then you receive a letter. No return address, no stamp. Just a torn scrap of parchment folded around a pressed daisy. Inside, written in barely legible pencil, I wore your corset to my brother's funeral. I could breathe when I needed to cry. Thank you. You sit with that note for hours. You reread it until the daisy crumbles. Then you pin it to your wall, because that's it, isn't it? This was never just about course. It's about choice, autonomy, the freedom to sit, stand, move, sing, grieve without wincing. So you keep going. You teach classes. You mentor a rising seamstress from Ireland who dreams of designing corsets for dancers. You write an article for the Breathing Room called The Boning Myth, debunking the idea that only steel can shape the body. You even design a corset for horseback riding, complete with side pockets for apples and rebellion. And one rainy Tuesday, a young man enters your shop, pale, anxious, maybe 22. I want one, he says, voice trembling, for posture, for performance, not for hiding. Nod. I know. He chooses a navy brocade model with subtle embroidery. When he tries it on, he exhales like he hasn't in years. His eyes shine, and suddenly, you see it clear as a hand-stitched seam that what you're doing isn't confined to gender or fashion or even history. You're reminding people what it feels like to own their bodies again. Your corsets aren't revolutions in silk. They're invitations to breathe, to expand, to take up space. And you're just the tailor at the threshold, holding the door open. It starts with a parade. You're not even invited at first. You hear about it from Edgar, who's been asked to design costumes for a group of suffragettes planning to march in something called the Procession of Progress. The theme? Breath. And voice? He tells you over tea like it's a joke. They want 50 women to march in custom corsets, unboned, unlaced, and, dare I say, liberating. Almost spit your tea into your embroidery hoop. That's ridiculous. But you already feel your fingers twitching. You're imagining fabrics, weights, fastenings, how to balance structure with softness, how to make something that doesn't squeeze the soul out of a woman while still making her feel tall commanding. He leans in, grinning. They want you. You roll your eyes. I'm not a parade. They said if you refuse, they'll name the horse pulling their banner wagon after you. You join, of course you do. The lead-up is chaos. The lead-up is chaos-delicious. Sizes, backgrounds, flood your little workroom. Aristocrats rub elbows with chimney sweeps. A librarian from Leeds demands crimson velvet. Baker's apprentice From Brighton wants lavender eyelets that match her hair ribbon. They all want the same thing. Underneath, room to breathe, and you deliver. The night before the procession, you stand alone in the shop, hands sore, eyes gritty. You line up the last corset, number 50 in its mannequin, smoothing down its front panel. Pale blue, with embroidered lungs stitched in silver thread, you trace them left and right, air in, air out. It's not protest garb, it's armor made. Of release, historians still argue whether the procession of progress marked the true beginning of corset reform. Some credit an obscure Viennese health journal instead. Others point to you, in this moment. But you don't think about legacy, you think about daybreak. The parade begins under a bright spring sun. The streets bloom with women-lace parasols, ribboned boots, banners flapping in the breeze like sails. You're somewhere in the middle, next to Elsie, who carries a sign that reads, "A waist is not a wound." Ahead, the band plays something triumphant and brassy. Behind you, Clara pushes a prom filled with bolts of satin and laughter. You spot people watching from windows, others tossing flower petals from rooftops. And the crowd goodness, the crowd they cheer as if you're not just marching, moving the century forward. One man heckles, "Put a corset on your mind." You bow at him theatrically. He turns red. The crowd roars. Afterward, there's lemonade and speeches. Someone passes around sticky-fingered cake. A girl from Wales weeps in your arms, clutching her corset like a talisman. "I didn't know I was allowed to feel good in my own body," she says. You don't say anything. You just hold her. Later that month, requests pour in for your procession line. You name the collection Breathe Easy, and it becomes the fastest-selling design you've ever produced. Department stores place bulk orders. Fashion houses in. Paris and Milan send telegrams asking for licensing rights. Even your old nemesis, Madame Fournier, sends a letter. "You've done what I never could. You've made comfort scandalous, Brava." You frame it. Your shop expands. It's not into something soulless, no. Never that, but into a cooperative. You hire half the parade marchers. One becomes your accountant. Another, your dye specialist.
Ever.
Runs workshops on adaptive designs for queer and trans clients. Though no one uses those words, yet just nods and smiles and sighs of relief. And still, you make time to sit in the quiet, to stitch, to remember. Because for every joyful letter, every victory, there are still those who resist. Still women collapsing backstage. Still girls tying themselves, their mother's old corsets because they think pain is tradition. You never forget them. One night you write an open letter. It runs in the Lady's Mirror and is later reprinted in 5 languages. You call it Notes from a Corset Maker. It begins. "They said I ruined fashion, but I never wanted to ruin anything. I wanted to release it." You end with this. "If breathing is rebellion, then rebellion begins in the ribs." You don't know it yet, but that line will be carved onto a plaque in front of a future museum. For now, you sit at your work table. You run your fingers along. A bolt of midnight blue silk. The gas lamp flickers. Outside, London hums. The century's nearly over, but it hasn't gone quietly, it's shimmied. Shrieked, laced and unlaced its way forward. And you're not finished. You're sketching. A design for something no one asked for, but you know they'll need. A corset with nothing to prove. You wake one morning to find your hands trembling. Not just the pleasant post-parade fatigue or the ache of age gently whispering at your joints, no. This is different. It's persistent. Tiny tremors that make threading a needle feel like catching. Smoke. You drop your scissors twice before breakfast. The doctor comes, all spectacles and polite coughs. He taps, listens, frowns. He doesn't call it by name, not exactly, but you know what he means. The word he doesn't say hangs between you like poorly laced stays, nervous exhaustion, or worse, hysteria. You smile at him so sweetly it could be poison. He recommends rest. Sunshine, no corsets, no sewing, no stress. You nod. Then you wait for him to leave and you go back to the workshop. Because stopping now, after everything, after Clara's daughter wore your breathable brocade corset to her first dance and came home breathless only from excitement, not suffocation? No, you can't stop, but you adapt. You assign more. Dictate more. Edgar takes over your drafting. Elsie organizes appointments. You become the brain of the operation, if not the hands. And slowly, something beautiful begins. You become the story more than the stitch. Young dressmakers come just to watch you. They sketch while you speak. They jot down your advice as though it were scripture. Don't fight the waist, you tell one girl. Invite it to the party. The tremor never fully leaves. But you learn to work around it. You design one last prototype, fingers jerking, thread knotting, sweat beading at your temple. If the final stitch goes in crooked, you leave it intentionally. Tiny rebellion in silver thread. Historians still debate whether your hand tremor influenced the rise of looser bodices and drop waist. Silhouettes in early 20th century fashion, some call it coincidence. Others swear it was the accidental genius of physical limitation. Meanwhile, outside your shop, something else is shifting. Women are voting. Not all, but many. You read the headlines with quiet glee. They march still, some in suits, others in your corsets, some in neither. Freedom, it seems, wears what it likes. But resistance doesn't disappear. You're invited to a university debate. Topic: should the corset be preserved as historical fashion or discarded as torture device? You nearly laugh out loud at the phrasing, but you go and you speak, softly, firmly. You tell the audience, it's not the corset that hurts. Us. It's the reason we wear it. Afterward, a student approaches you, nervous, holding a paper rolled up like a scroll. I want to make clothes. Not for the body, for the soul inside it. You nod. That old warmth again. The good ache. Then make them, you whisper, but make them dangerous. Your corsets aren't just garments anymore. They're passed down like heirlooms, tucked in cedar chests next to letters and lockets. Girls try them on like relics, dusting the weight of history on their ribs. Most of them laugh. Some cry. One writes you a note. I wore your design and didn't feel beautiful. I felt real. I didn't know that was allowed. You pin it to your workshop wall. Above all, the awards and magazine features, it's worth more. One evening, as a thunderstorm rolls through, you sit with Edgar by the window. You drink strong tea. He knits his knit socks for a new lover he hasn't yet introduced. I heard someone call you the corset witch of Whitechapel, he murmurs, teasing. You cackle, better than the corset ghost. They'll write books about you, you know. You shrug. They'll get it wrong. They'll beat, and they'll get it right too. 'Cause really, your story was never just about ribs and waistlines. It was about a century squeezing the breath from women. You one crooked stitch at a time, pushing back. You're not the only one, but you were loud and less covered, often delightfully inappropriate. You think back to your first corset, the one with the terrible fit, the itchy satin, the too tight boning, how angry you were, how desperate, how alone. You want to find that girl 10, 15, 20 lifetimes ago and say you were never broken, just badly measured, but maybe. She already knows that, because you've told her story now in silk and steel and thread. You wake earlier now. The sun hasn't risen yet, and the world holds its breath in that quiet, dusky hour before anything must begin. The kettle sings. The stairs creak. Oh? You descend them one at a time, your hand grazing the railing, your bones humming with memory. There's a letter waiting for you. It's thick, heavy, the kind with intention. Behind every curve of ink, you slit it open with the same bone-handled knife you've used since your earliest commissions and pull out a folded invitation printed in gold leaf. The Museum of London requests your presence at the opening of Beneath the Lace. The women who redefine the corset. You laugh, not because it's funny. Died, because the irony is richer than velvet. Once, they would have locked your creations in cabinets, marked medical curiosities, or filed you away as a footnote in the annals of scandalous tailoring. Now you're a guest of honor, you go, of course. The museum is cool and clean, smelling faintly of archival dust and polished wood. A young curator, nervous, reverent, greets you like royalty. She walks you past mannequins dressed in your past. The Clara style with its clever bust paneling, the memory model with its subtle, hidden embroidery, every stitch a story, Visitors gather, murmuring in awe. You hear one whisper, "I didn't know corsets could look like that." Exactly one case holds a cracked, starkened corset from the early 1800s. Whalebone, waist barely larger than a jar lid. You can see where the fabric strained at the seams, where the wearer must have gasped just to blink. A placard beside it reads, "Object of fashion or tool of oppression." Historians still debate the function in, fallout of garments like this. You tilt your head, or trying at least. The exhibit turns a corner and softens. There's your protest corset. It's the one with the off-center, lacing and mismatched. Silk. A quote is stenciled on the wall beside it. "Beauty shouldn't bruise you." Anonymous dressmaker. 1906. You don't remember saying that, but you might have. Back at home, the shop is quieter these days. Elsie runs it with brisk elegance, and Edgar still brings in ridiculous swatches of paisley that no one ever requests but somehow always sell. You're more shadow than seamstress now, gliding room to room, offering suggestions like passing ghosts. Offer warnings, but the girls still come. Some are customers. Some are historians. Some just want to sit in the room where you once ripped out 57 seems to prove a point. One brings her mother's corset. "Can you tell me who made it?" she asks. You look at the stitching, the tuck at the bust line, the tiny tag half faded, and you smile. "That was mine," you say. "Made it during the silk rationing." That lace. I bought it from a widow who'd salvaged it from her husband's funeral cuffs. Said he never appreciated beauty while alive might. As well, dress the dead. The girl gasps. You wink, it's all legend now. But it's also all true. You start recording voice notes at Elsie's suggestion, tiny oral histories that she swears will become a podcast one day. Look at you. You begin each one with, well, once upon a tight-laced time, and spiral into tales of corset sabotage, of fashion pranks pulled at balls, of the noblewoman who had a secret pouch sewn into her stays to hide opium from her husband. People eat it up. There's something delicious about the intersection of scandal and silk. One of your favorite stories resurfaces. The woman who once fell down a flight of stairs because her corset laces were so tight she couldn't bend her knees, who then stood up, slapped the wall, and shouted, "Worth IT." Turns out she lived 293. Your listeners call her a feminist icon. You just remember her as Geraldine, who always tipped in gin. You've stopped designing new styles, but your old ones are finding second lives. A queer fashion collective in Soho is reinterpreting your patterns with reflective panels and lead thread. You go to their show. You cry. "I wanted to feel like I could take up space," says one model, voice trembling, corset glowing like a second spine. You nod, and did you? She grins like a cathedral. You give her the thimble from your necklace. Keep building, you tell her. The weeks go on. Softer, slower, you sometimes catch yourself writing letters to people who've long gone Clara, even your mother. Find yourself forgiving them in these unwritten drafts. It's not because they deserve it, but because you've stitched yourself into something larger than blame. Your body isn't what it used to be, but your voice. It's sharper than a tailor's needle. You use it wisely. One night, Elsie finds you asleep at the work table, half-finished corset beside your hand. Not one of yours, one of hers. You were pinning lace. She tucks a shawl around your shoulders and doesn't say a word. But when you wake, the lace is exactly where it should be. You don't wear corsets anymore, not every day. Your spine protests now, and your lungs have grown rather fond of deep, effortless breaths. But you keep one close. It's just one. Folded inside a cedarwood drawer lined with lavender and old receipts. It's simple, made of faded blue cotton. It's embroidered with forget-me-knots. It was the first corset you ever made without crying. There are mornings you take it out not to wear, but to run your fingers along its seams. You trace the boning channels like Braille, remembering every prick of the needle, every moment you doubted your worth. You feel the ghost of the girl you were, the one who thought pain was the price of dignity, and you smile at her gently. She survived. You did too, but not everyone did. That's the thought that still sits with you. Sometimes quiet and weighty as a bolt of morning silk, you remember, Lilith. She came to you in 1892, pale as chalk with a corset that looked like it had been stolen. From a coffin, her waist measured 16 inches, and yet her eyes begged for more. "Can you get me to 15?" she whispered, hands trembling. You tried to talk her out of it. You told her how the ribs would shift, how organs suffocate, how no waist was worth dying for. "I don't want to die," she said. "I just want to matter." You made her the corset. You made it a little looser than she asked. She wore it anyway. For 3 years, then stopped coming. You heard the rumors internal hemorrhaging, a fall in the garden, a burst lung from coughing. Too hard. Historians still argue whether tightlacing truly killed women, or whether it simply exacerbated already frail bodies. Whether medicine at the time unfairly blamed women's fashion for broader societal failings. But you saw too many bruises not to wonder. Sometimes you wonder if Lilith's story would have been different if corsets had been made for comfort, not conquest. If anyone had taught her that her worth wasn't measured in inches, but her story wasn't. Rare, there were so many others. Women who wore beauty like armor, even when it cut into them. Who accepted the ache as part of the ritual. Who stood straighter, not because they felt proud, but because the corset wouldn't let them bend. You've kept a ledger, not for accounts. It's a little blue book, tucked beside your sewing chalk. In it, every woman you ever dressed, their measurements, their favorite color, the name they wished someone would use when calling them. You read it sometimes, loud like prayer beads. Miriam, who hid bruises with lace. Eloise, who insisted on crimson even for mourning. Harriet, who once kicked a duke in the shins for tugging on her laces. Cassandra, who wore a corset under her chemise as she smuggled banned books into girls' schools. You keep their names alive. Because history forgets women like them, especially the ones who didn't break records or marry titles. It's the ones who just lived, or tried to. You've noticed a shift, though. The girls who visit the shop today, they ask different questions. Not, "Will this make my waist smaller? But can I dance in this?" Not, "Is this appropriate for a lady?" But will I feel like myself in it? Progress. It's not linear. Zigzags, stitches, unravels, begins again. You remember when? Corsets came back in the 20s as avant-garde art pieces, and again, in the 50s, repackaged as shapewear. Then the punk kids claimed them in the 80s, pairing satin busks with combat boots. Today, Gen Z wears them over hoodies, daring the world to question their confidence. You love it? Of it? Even when it looks utterly ridiculous. You once asked a girl why her corset had neon, straps and fishhooks instead of laces. She shrugged. "Because it makes my grandmother roll her eyes." You laughed until you cried. You've learned that power changes hands slowly and rarely all at once. Corsets didn't die. They adapted. And so did you. Some nights you still stitch, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because creation is its own kind of resistance. You take a corset off the mannequin, new design. Side lacing, soft boning, hidden pocket for secrets. You run your hand across the silk. There's a whisper of the past in its folds, but also a promise. Someone will wear this. They'll feel taller, braver, maybe even whole. And when they ask who made it, you'll hope they say, someone who remembered what it was like not to be able to breathe and decided no one else should suffer the same. You light a lamp, just a soft amber flame, and it flickers over the collection. Not clothes? No, not anymore. It's a museum now. It's informal, yes, but sacred nonetheless. Corsets arranged by decade, 1830s corded bodices, all gentle curve and rural. Restraint, 1850s white peak cottons, stiff as sermon benches, 1870s hourglass killers, whalebone and ambition stitched into every line. And then the 1890s, swooping escurves, as if someone tried to teach elegance how to strut. Each one has a tag, handwritten, age, softened, name, year, waist size. Some carry inked notes on the back, worn at niece's wedding, or collapsed. At train station, a few are unsigned. You still keep them. And you bring visitors. Not often. Just the ones who ask the right kind of questions. Tonight, it's a young woman with sea-glass eyes and a septum ring. She studies the glass front case like she's reading scripture. Finally, she turns and says, "Did they know what they were doing to themselves?" You nod, then shake your head. "They knew some of it," you say. "The bruises, the headaches, shallow breath. But they didn't always see the long game. Some did. Some noticed how their periods vanished, how their backs ached before 30, how coughing became its own kind of gamble. There are journals, quiet little testaments of women loosening their laces in private, confessing to fatigue, to breathlessness, to dreams of simply slumping in a chair like a man might. Historians still argue whether corsets were truly dangerous, or whether the dangers were merely exaggerated by later feminists eager for symbols. But maybe, you add gently, those scholars never had to lace one up during a heat wave. The visitor giggles. You tell her about the Paris Medical Society's 1901 report. How autopsies of tightly corseted women often revealed shifted livers, compressed lungs, misaligned spines. And yet no formal laws ever came of it. No bans. Just polite suggestions. Corset ads, carried on, chirping, about graceful figures and reliable posture. Like the danger was just part of the fun. Then you show her something private. You unlock a lower drawer and pull out the black file. Letters from women whose corsets failed them, not structurally, spiritually. One described how her corset had become a metaphor for her marriage, tight, rigid, silencing. Another confessed to burning hers during the 1912 coal strike, calling it the only satisfying bonfire I ever lit. A third simply wrote, "I thought I was weak for wanting to breathe. But now I know I was just human." You pause. Let the visitor take it in. Her eyes flick from corset to corset like she's seeing ghosts. Then she asks the real question. Why didn't they just stop wearing them? And here you tread carefully, because the answer is complicated. Some women did stop. Often they had means, or radical friends, or a very supportive or very dead husband. But most didn't have the luxury. Corsets were stitched into respectability, into employment, into marriage markets. A corseted body read as proper, disciplined, desirable, unlaced. That invited whispers, or worse. You tell her about governesses fired for being sloppily dressed. Shopgirls passed over for promotion because their silhouettes didn't match. The store mannequins. Mothers scolded by doctors who claimed loose dressing led to uterine disorders. Clothing, you explain, has always been political. Corsets weren't just garments, they were social contracts. And breaking those contracts? That took guts. You show her an 1889 caricature, a suffragist depicted as hideously corsetless. Slouching with monstrous curves, her hair wild, her spine unholy. The message was clear. Women who abandoned the corset also abandoned their femininity and their worth. Still,
Amen.
some women rebelled. The Rational Dress Society, the Bloomerites. The artistic set in Bloomsbury. They preached about anatomy, freedom, and the right to sit on the floor with one's knees up. They got laughed at, but they persisted. You open another drawer, this one. More cheerful relics of resistance, woolen reform corset with stretch panels, a pamphlet called Breath and Beauty, a photo of a woman wearing knickerbockers and grinning defiantly at the camera. You once met her granddaughter. She brought the photo in a velvet pouch and whispered, "My Nana ran a bicycle club. Called themselves the Spine Sisters." That one you framed. The visitor leans in close. So corsets weren't evil? Just ... complicated? Exactly, you? Say she stays for tea. Asks if she can try one on. Not to tight lace, just to feel it. You lace her in slowly, gently, like an initiation. She looks in the mirror and laughs. It's like wearing scaffolding made of compliments. Then she slumps into the chaise and sighs. Okay, yeah, I get why they fainted. You smile. Another. Lesson learned. As she leaves, you press a tiny packet into her hand lavender sachet. Old lace, a quote stitched into the corner. A woman is not a waist to be whittled, but a soul to be seen. She promises to come back. Most of them do. You close the drawers, douse the lamp, and for a moment, just a moment, you picture a future where no one feels the need to shrink to be seen, where clothing empowers rather than confines, where every corset past or futures worn by choice, not compulsion. You hope to see that future, but for now, you rest. You wake to birdsong, soft and intrusive, the kind that trickles through old window glass and reminds you the world keeps spinning, no matter how tightly it once laced itself. Today feels like a memory waiting to happen. You dress simply, cotton. Blouse, soft trousers, slippers worn to a whisper. Nothing that pinches. You glance once at the velvet-lined drawer, the corsets asleep in their silk hand, then turn away. There's no need to revisit them just now. Instead, you head to the study, where letters wait, not email, actual letters. You made the deliberate choice to keep this part analog. There's something more respectful about ink and envelopes, especially when the words inside are so raw. The first is from a teenager in Michigan. I wore a waist trainer to prom because I thought it would make me beautiful. I passed out next to the punch bowl. Thank you for teaching me I wasn't weak, just breathing. The second comes from a retired seamstress in Bath. She enclosed a photograph of her grandmother's wedding, corset ivory satin. Tattered but proud. I've kept it for years, she writes. But only now do I see the weight it carried. Aren't just fan letters, they're confessions, rituals of release. Modern women are still shedding things, not just shapewear or fashion trauma, but assumptions that small is always better, that beauty demands silence, that discomfort is a virtue. You file the letters. Alphabetical, but also emotional, some too tender to read twice in a day. Then you notice the third envelope. Unfamiliar, expensive paper, no return address. You open it. Inside is a photo, black and white. A woman on a city street, mid-stride, hat tilted rakishly, waist nipped within an inch of reason. And yet she's smiling. Not the soft, vacant smile of compliance. No, this is a grin. Toothy, wicked, alive. On the back someone's written, she always said her corset made her feel invincible. We never knew whether to believe her. You set it down, that you think is the heart of it. Corsets weren't just cages. Sometimes they were armor. A woman might lace herself tight because she was about to walk into a hostile office, or confront a father who still called her girl even after she'd buried 3 children, or meet a lover she didn't quite trust not to vanish. The corset held her together. The world wanted her to fall apart. Historians still debate whether corsets should be understood as oppressive or empowering. Some argue they were symbols of submission designed by men for men to make women pleasingly fragile. Others claim corsets gave women control, shaping their appearance in a world that offered few other kinds of agency. And I think maybe the answer is both. It depends on the day. You head to the exhibit room. The sun streams through the leaded glass, lighting up the brass clasps, the delicate flossing. The tiny stitched initial Z, CAB, are untiny signals of ownership in a world that rarely gave women their full names. Today's visitor arrives early. She's older, gray hair pinned high, sharp cane. Brighter eyes than anyone has a right to at that age. She walks the length of the cases in silence. Finally, she stops at the 1860s maternity corset. Oh, she says softly. That one. You glance at her. You recognize it? She nods. Not that exact one, but close.
Us.
My grandmother wore one like it. Said it was the only way she could keep working through her pregnancies. You wait, then she adds, said it also stopped her from breathing properly and made her back seize up when she stood too long. But she smiled while she said it. It was funny, like she'd beaten it somehow. You nod. That sounds about right. The woman leans forward, cane tapping the glass. She lived to 95, she says, and never once called herself a victim. There's pride in her voice, but also something else. Sadness, gratitude. You're not sure? Maybe it's both? You offer tea? She declines, but accepts a seat. She asks what you think about the new corset revival runways, music videos, TikTok tutorials. You've seen them. Plastic boning and pastel mesh. Fashion that hints at history, but doesn't carry the same weight. Literal or metaphorical. You tell her, I think if people know the story and still choose it, that's freedom. Don't know? That's imitation without context. And that's dangerous. She smiles. Well said. Then she gets up and leaves you with a thought. I wonder what future museums will display about us. You turn that over in your mind. Will they show shapewear? Spanx beside selfies? Or maybe they'll exhibit smartphones, those glowing rectangles we carried like talismans. Letting strangers judge our faces and bodies in real time, maybe corsets, will seem quaint by comparison, or maybe timeless. You jot down the thought in your notebook. You keep a journal for moments like this. Call it continuity. The sun shifts. The room warms. You sit beside the display case and stare at a single corset soft peach brocade. Tiny waist, sturdy stitching. And you think, someone wore this to survive. A scandal. A wedding. Tuesday. You'll never know which. But the corset remembers. And you do too. You don't sleep that night, not out of worry or fear those emotions. Have long since run their course, but because your mind is crowded with women's voices. Some you've met, most you haven't. All of them cinched tightly into your thoughts. You lie on your back in the dark, the ceiling dissolving into memory. You imagine a drawing room in 1885, full of lace and polite tension. A milliner's workroom in 1902, where needle pricks outnumbered smiles. A war nurse in 1917, corset half loosened under her uniform, too busy to breathe deeply, too needed to complain, and you wonder again how many of them chose their corsets? How many were handed one before they even understood what was being asked of them? Question doesn't go away. Morning creeps in, a gauzy haze through the curtains. You stretch, vertebrae clicking back into awareness, and rise with the slow ache of someone who's been carrying more than bones. Downstairs, the museum is quiet. You're not open yet. The exhibits rest like sleeping ancestors, still under their low lights. But today isn't about opening. Today is about reckoning. You walk to the archive room. It's smaller, more private. Stacks of cardboard boxes, some labeled, some not, is where the corsets come first, before they're selected for display. Here they wait. You open one of the unlabeled boxes and lift out a navy blue corset, heavy, well-worn, stained near the laces. There's a faint perfume rosewater and something faintly metallic, like rust or old tears. You turn it over in your hands. Inside the seam, someone's sewn a name in tight red thread. Mabel. You don't know Mabel. No record of her in your files. No family tree, no photograph. But she wanted to be remembered. You add her to your ledger. Mabel, late 1800s, blue twill corset. Possibly domestic servant. That's just guesswork. But the wear patterns and fabrics suggest hard labor. Long days. You can't prove it, but you feel it. Historians still argue whether working-class women suffered more or less from corsetry than their upper-class counterparts. The rich could afford tailored fits and softer boning. But they also spent more hours seated, inactive, their organs compressed by social ritual. The poor wore cheaper corsets, worked through sweat and strain, and often lacked replacements when one wore out. So who paid the higher price? Maybe they both did, just in different currencies. You open another box. This one holds something stranger. A training corset for children. Pale pink, stiff, impossibly narrow. It looks like it belongs on a doll, not a person. But it's not. A toy. You hold it up and picture the child it once wrapped. Maybe 8 years old. Maybe 11. Maybe too young to understand the shape of sacrifice. Someone fastened this onto her each morning, laced it with calm fingers, smoothed her skirt over it, and told her, "Now stand up straight." Like a lady, the child probably obeyed. Because children do. And there it is, again, that tiny, creeping horror, how early it starts. How much is decided for us before we ever think to ask why? You put the corset back in its box and close the lid gently. Reverence is a small rebellion. There's a knock on the archive door. You're surprised it's early. It's your assistant, wide-eyed, breathless. "There's someone here." She says she donated something years ago, wants to see it again. Won't leave. You nod. Let her in. Moments later, a woman walks in, mid-60s, tall, elegant, in a wool cape that swishes like a secret. Her lipstick is a bold, perfect red. She doesn't introduce herself, she just says it belonged to my mother. I sent it here in 2009, ivory corset. Hand flossed? I was told it would be displayed. You check the ledger. It wasn't. Not because it lacked value, because it was too modern from the 1950s, too recent for Victorian exhibitions, too old for contemporary ones. The dreaded in-between, you bring it out. She takes it like it's breathing. This, she says, her voice soft but clear, was the only thing she wore during labor. She was vain. Even while dying, she wanted to look beautiful. I never forgave her for that. You say nothing. You've learned when silence is the kindest mirror. She sits. Then after a moment, but I also remember. She always stood taller than anyone, not just physically. She commanded space. Maybe the corset helped her do that. You nod. Empowerment and punishment, pride and pain, motherhood and performance. Everything at once. The woman hands the corset back. Thank you, she says. I just needed to know someone else had seen it, that it wasn't forgotten. You promise her it won't be. When she leaves, you hold the corset for a while then. Slowly you place it in a glass case. No labels, a plaque. Just light. Because some things don't need interpretation, only acknowledgement. That evening, you wander. Through the empty museum again, you pass the military corset from section 17, the one lined with rolled maps. The bridal corset from section 6, still smelling faintly of lavender. The medical corset from section 10, with its brutal steel ribs. And now, beside them all, the 1950s labor corset, final chapter that came after the epilogue. You dim the lights, the room breathes. Corsets were dangerous not just physically, but philosophically. They asked women to become something smaller, neater, quieter. But they also asked women to endure, to adapt, to survive. And women did. Oh, how they did. You lean against the museum's tall windows now, twilight pooling at your feet like spilled ink. The city hums outside quiet cars. The low bark of a distant dog, someone's radio crackling faint jazz from a porch. Life moving on. But inside, these walls, the corsets remain, silent, breathless. You've walked a long path through this history, not just through fabric and lacing, but through time, through bodies that once hurt and healed, hoped and rebelled. And the question still clings like perfume in a dressing room. Why did they wear them? Not they, you. Because somewhere in all this, you've realized it's never just those women back then. It's you too. Your spine, your shame, your shape held up to impossible ideals. Now you've lived versions of this story. We all have. You step away from the glass. There's one last box left unopened on the archive table. You'd forgotten it. When you pull off the lid, it reveals something unexpected. A modern corset. Sleek, black satin, with stretchy panels. Made not for concealment, but for visibility. This isn't a Victorian restraint device, it's a 2003. Goth clubwear piece designed to be worn on top of clothes. Statement, not submission. Still, it laces in the back. Still, it whispers the same question. Who are you trying to become? You trace the boning with your finger. Historians still argue whether modern shapewear is liberation or just a more palatable leash. Spanx, waist trainers, compression garments that promise smoothness but demand silence. No one's forcing you to wear them. But then again, no one had to force most Victorian women either. Pressure didn't need to be verbal. Lived. In glances and gossip, in fashion plates and marriage prospects, and mothers who measured your waist like it was a moral failing. And even now, the echoes remain. A viral fitness challenge. A red carpet body double. A TikTok trend called corset core. We laugh at those 19th century fainting couches, but how many times have you held your breath in a dressing room? Just to zip the thing, just to look right. You sit down on the bench, beneath the window, and in that gentle dusk, you start to sketch an exhibit proposal. Corsets now, from steel to selfies. You'll need mannequins, maybe mirrors, maybe even a little interactive touchscreen that invites people to lace up a virtual corset. Try walking through a day. You'll end the display with a single line of text etched in brass. What are you still wearing and why? That one might stick. The museum will open tomorrow as usual. People will come in and marvel at the frilly terrors. They'll say things like, "How barbaric," and "I could never wear that." Some will smile awkwardly at the bridal display or tilt their heads at the child-size corset, unsure what to feel. But a few will pause longer, will stand before the final case. With the clubwear corset and the TikTok screenshots, and realize the thread didn't break. It only changed color, and it's still wrapped around their ribs. You smile softly. Then dim the hallway lights until only the tiniest glow remains, just enough to catch the glint of satin, steel, and stitched rebellion. Let them rest. You've told their story, and now you can finally tell your own. You exhale, long and slow, like unlacing something tight that's been gripping your ribs all evening. That was a lot. And maybe right now, your brain feels a bit like an overstuffed hat box brimmed with images of tight bodices, whispered instructions and choices made under the weight of expectation, so let it all float away now. The corsets, the gowns, the soft tread of heeled boots on creaky floorboards, the needle-thin waists wrapped in whispered sacrifice. You can let them drift into the velvet dark behind your eyes. Feel your own body, again, uncinched, unshaped, just you, breathing, easy. You might roll your shoulders a little now, loosen what doesn't need to be held anymore. Maybe stretch out your legs, or sink a little deeper into the warmth of your sheets. And as the quiet settles, remember this: history isn't just names in books or corsets in glass. It's every choice you get to make today, 'cause someone else didn't. So wear what you want, stand how you like, and never ever confuse silence with elegance. Sleep well tonight. It's unbound and unburdened, because tomorrow you rise without laces.